Introduction, the cartoon that doesn't let you off easy. There is a moment in Rick and Morty, early in the series, where a 14-year-old boy is standing in a backyard in the dark, looking down at his own grave. Not a metaphorical grave. Not a dream sequence. An actual hole in the ground with his own dead body in it. A body he just helped bury, while the family dog sits nearby and the stars hang overhead like they always do, completely unbothered. And after that, after burying himself, he goes inside and goes to bed. Because what else do you do? That image has always stayed with me, not because it is disturbing, though it is, not because it is funny, though in the way the show delivers it, there is something absurdly, painfully funny about it. It stays with me because it is one of the most honest things I have ever seen a piece of entertainment do. It takes the most extreme possible version of a thing many of us quietly feel. The sense that we have left behind some version of ourselves we cannot get back, that we have moved into a life that does not entirely feel like ours, that something was lost and the world just kept going anyway, and it does not dress it up. It puts a boy in a backyard with a shovel. Rick and Morty is a science fiction cartoon about a genius grandfather who takes his anxious teenage grandson on adventures across the universe. That is the premise. And for a lot of people, it stays exactly at that level. A wild, irreverent, frequently disgusting animated comedy that is clever with its sci-fi references and generous with its absurdist humor. And there is nothing wrong with watching it that way. That version of the show is genuinely one of the most entertaining things ever put on television. But there is another version of this show sitting underneath that one, and it has been there since the very first episode. It is a show about what happens when a person runs so hard from pain that they lose the ability to feel anything at all. It is a show about the terrible cost of intelligence when it is used as a weapon against your own emotions. It is a show about what a family looks like when generational damage gets passed from one person to the next, like a gift that nobody wanted and nobody knows how to return. It is a show about meaning and loneliness, and whether the size of the universe makes your life matter less, or whether the fact that your life is happening at all, amid all that vastness, makes it more precious than you could ever measure. Created by Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland, and premiering on Adult Swim in December of 2013, Rick and Morty has run for over 8 seasons across more than a decade. It has won Emmy Awards. It has generated one of the most intense and devoted fan communities in modern pop culture. It has produced the kind of cultural moments that outlive the episodes that created them. The Pickle Rick episode won an Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2018. The phrase, "Nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's gonna die, come watch TV," has been quoted, tattooed on skin, printed on posters, and whispered to people who needed to hear it in moments of genuine darkness. The show has become something that people return to not just for entertainment but for something closer to company. There is a reason for that, and it is not the portal gun. It is not the interdimensional cable. It is not even the genuinely brilliant science fiction concepts that the writers spend real care constructing. It is the fact that at the center of every wild adventure, every alien civilization, every dimension-hopping catastrophe, there is a family that is hurting in the exact same ways that real families hurt. And there is a man at the center of that family who is the smartest being in any universe he enters, and he is miserable in a way that is completely familiar, because his misery does not come from the cosmos. It comes from inside. That is what this video is about. We are going to spend the next couple of hours going through the lore of Rick and Morty, not to catalog every alien race or map every dimension, but to find the lessons. The actual real transferable you can take this home and use it lessons that this show has been building for over a decade, because they are there. They are in every major arc, every character relationship, every apparently absurd plot that turns out on inspection to have a human heart beating inside it. We are going to talk about what happens when you use your mind to run from your feelings. We are going to talk about what anxiety is actually for. We are going to talk about why the people who seem the most okay are often the ones who need the most care. We are going to talk about what it means to live inside a system that was designed to keep you small and what it costs to decide you are done with that. We are going to talk about grief and the people we lose and whether love is worth the price. And we are going to talk about what a cartoon about a drunk genius and his nervous grandson has to say about being alive in a universe that does not explain itself. Get comfortable. This one is going to take a while, and I think it is going to be worth it. Section 1. Rick Sanchez and the Burden of Intelligence. The trap of the smartest person in the room. Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in any universe he chooses to inhabit. This is not just a character detail. It is the fundamental premise of his existence. He built a portal gun from scratch, a device that lets him travel between any dimension in the multiverse. He built it in a garage. He has created technology that entire galactic governments and civilizations have been unable to replicate or even fully understand. He has died and been resurrected through backup clones so many times that death for him has become less of a boundary and more of a mild inconvenience. The show makes it clear, and keeps making it clear, that there is no intellectual ceiling for this man. He is not just smart. He is operating on a plane of understanding so far beyond everyone around him that he sometimes seems barely present in the conversations he is having. And he is absolutely, completely, irreparably miserable. That is the thing about Rick that takes a few episodes to fully land on you. On the surface, he seems fine. He seems more than fine. He is drinking, but he seems cheerful about it. He is taking his grandson on adventures to alien civilizations, and he seems to be having the time of his life. He mocks everyone around him with a kind of casual fluency that suggests he has been doing it so long it no longer requires effort. He walks into every room like he already knows how it ends. He has a response to everything. He is never at a loss. And then you catch a moment, a tiny window. And through it, you see something that changes the way you watch everything that came before it and everything that comes after. The first time I noticed it was in the second season episode called Autoerotic Assimilation, which we will spend more time with later in this video. But at the end of that episode, after Rick's former partner Unity leaves him, after the grand passionate reunion ends exactly the way it always was going to end, Rick comes home to his garage. He sits at his workbench. He assembles something. He tests it on a small creature, a squirming little thing that he watches die, and then he aims it at his own head, and he almost pulls the trigger. He only stops because he passes out first. The camera pulls back slowly. He is lying face down on his workbench. The lights in the garage are dim, and there is nothing funny about it. There is no punchline coming. It is just a man who knows everything there is to know about the universe, lying alone in a garage, having barely survived his own grief. The lesson in Rick Sanchez is not that intelligence is bad. It is more precise than that. The lesson is that intelligence, when used as a substitute for emotional engagement, becomes the most sophisticated cage ever built. Rick knows this on some level. He even says it, in the way he says most of his important truths, buried inside sarcasm, sprinted past before you can catch it. He uses his mind to avoid everything that his mind cannot solve. And the things his mind cannot solve are the only things that actually matter to him. Think about what the show eventually reveals about Rick's past. Rick was not always this way. There was a version of him who had a wife named Diane, who had a daughter named Beth, who had a life that was recognizably human and warm. And that life was destroyed, not by the universe's indifference, but by something targeted and personal. Another Rick, a version of himself from a different dimension, killed Diane and killed Beth. Just to make a point, because Rick C-137, the Rick we follow, had refused an offer to abandon his family and travel the dimensions with the other Rick, and the other Rick found that choice offensive in some way that went deeper than logic. The loss broke him. It broke him in a way that his intelligence genuinely could not repair. Because you cannot think your way out of grief. You cannot engineer a solution to the absence of someone you love. You cannot portal gun your way back to the moment before. Rick tried everything his mind could offer. He spent decades hunting Rick Prime across the multiverse. He built a citadel. He helped create the central finite curve, which we will talk about at length later, as a way to limit the multiverse to only dimensions where he was the smartest and most powerful being, a move that says everything about where his head was. None of it brought Diane back. None of it fixed Beth's childhood, the daughter he eventually found and adopted into his grief, a daughter who grew up with a father whose entire being was organized around a wound she could not see or touch. None of it gave Rick a single night of peace. It just gave him more dimensions to run through, more adventures to drown in, more excuses to stay moving so fast that nothing could catch him. That is the thing about Rick that the show understands with almost clinical precision. He does not run from his pain because he does not care. He runs from it because he cares more than he can bear. He loved Diane with a totality that his brilliant mind cannot organize into something manageable. He loves his family in the current timeline with a ferocity that terrifies him. And because love is the one thing you cannot control, cannot engineer, cannot outthink, cannot solve, Rick has decided at some level of himself that the safest response to love is to keep it at a distance while staying just close enough to technically have it. This is why he stays with Beth's family. This version of Beth who was not even his original daughter but who he allows himself to love as if she is. This is why he takes Morty on adventures. He tells himself it is practical. He tells himself it is because Morty's brainwaves cancel out his own and hide him from detection. And that is true, technically. But the show makes clear over and over that the relationship between Rick and Morty is the most genuinely tender thing in Rick's life. The moments where Rick drops the performance, drops the nihilism, drops the sneer and the deflection are almost always moments involving Morty. The Pickle Rick episode exists, in its truest form, as a study of exactly this mechanism. Rick turned himself into a pickle to avoid going to family therapy. He turned himself into a vegetable to escape sitting in a room where someone might ask him how he feels. He then spent an entire day in a sewer, engineering mechanical armor out of dead rats, fighting through a building full of armed guards, getting shot at and stabbed and covered in blood and waste, rather than spend 1 hour talking to a therapist. Dr. Wong, the therapist voiced by Susan Sarandon with a calm that functions as its own form of devastation, says this to him when he finally shows up. Rick, the only connection between your unquestionable intelligence and the sickness destroying your family is that everyone in your family, you included, use intelligence to justify sickness. You seem to alternate between viewing your own mind as an unstoppable force and as an inescapable curse. And I think it's because the only truly unapproachable concept for you is that it's your mind within your control. You chose to come here, you chose to talk, to belittle my vocation, just as you chose to become a pickle. You are the master of your universe, and yet you are dripping with rat blood and feces, your enormous mind literally vegetating by your own hand. That speech is the most important 30 seconds of dialogue in the entire series. It is the show stating its thesis directly, without metaphor, with nowhere to hide. The thing holding Rick back is not the universe. It is not his enemies. It is not the Galactic Federation, or Rick Prime, or any of the countless alien threats he has dismantled over the years. It is him. It is his choice. Every single moment of avoidance, every adventure chosen over a conversation, every drink poured instead of a feeling expressed is a choice. And he makes it so fluently, so habitually, so automatically that it has stopped feeling like a choice. It feels like personality. It feels like who he is. But Dr. Wong has just told him, clearly and without cruelty, that it is not who he is. It is what he does. And those are different things. The lesson here, the one that transfers directly to real life with almost unsettling precision, is this. Your most sophisticated quality can become your most destructive defense mechanism. Whatever your version of Rick's intelligence is, and it does not have to be intelligence, it can be your work ethic, your humor, your ability to charm people in any room, your talent for analysis, your physical fitness, your caretaking of others. Whatever the thing is that you do exceptionally well and that the world rewards you for, that thing can become the thing you hide behind. It can become the reason you do not have to look at what is underneath it. And what is underneath it is usually something much simpler and much more frightening than anything a portal gun ever encountered. The brain is extraordinarily good at building reasons not to do hard things. It is extraordinarily good at making avoidance look like productivity. Rick does not sit around doing nothing. He invents, he discovers, he solves, he creates. He is relentlessly active. And all of that activity adds up to a very elaborate, very convincing way of never sitting still long enough to feel what he feels. There is also something the show does that is worth noticing carefully. It does not present Rick's approach as stupid or cowardly. The show has genuine respect for Rick's pain. The show understands why he does what he does. It never mocks him for running. It shows you, with enormous compassion, how someone ends up in a garage at the end of a terrible night with a weapon pointed at their own head. It shows you the whole path. It shows you the wife. It shows you the daughter. It shows you the decades of hunting and building and traveling and drinking that were all really the same action, wearing different clothes. It does this because the show knows that most people watching it understand this mechanism from the inside, not at Rick's scale. You probably did not build a portal gun to cope, but you have organized your life at some point around not having to feel something. You have gotten very busy at a very convenient moment. You have started a project, started a diet, started a new series, started anything that kept your hands occupied and your mind moving, so it would not have to stop and sit with the thing it did not want to sit with. Rick's invitation to us is not to stop being brilliant or talented or capable. It is to notice the moments when we reach for that capability as armor rather than as a gift. To notice the moments when being the smartest person in the room is something we are using to avoid being the most honest person in the room. To notice when the adventure we are choosing is really just a way of not going to therapy. The garage at the end of the episode is the cost of all that avoiding. The rat blood and the feces are the cost. The face down on the workbench, alone, in the dark, is the cost. Rick Sanchez is not a cautionary tale about intelligence. He is a cautionary tale about what intelligence becomes when it is never in service of truth. He is the show's greatest argument for the simple, unglamorous, deeply uncool act of sitting with yourself in a quiet room and asking, what am I actually feeling right now? And what am I choosing to do instead of feeling it? If you are watching from anywhere in the world right now, I would love to know where you are and what time it is for you. Drop your location and time in the comments below. And if this is clicking with you, if you are the kind of person who comes to a 2-hour video essay about a cartoon because something in you is looking for something, then subscribing would mean a lot. It keeps this little corner of the internet going. Now let us keep going. Section 2. Morty's anxiety and the gift hidden in fear. Morty Smith is afraid all the time. This is so foundational to who he is as a character that it barely needs stating. He stammers. He second guesses. He asks to go home while they are still on the way there. He closes his eyes before bad things happen, which, in his life, they always do. His voice carries that perpetual tremor of someone bracing for impact even when nothing is currently flying at his head. He is 14 years old. He is C average at school. He cannot talk to the girl he likes without falling apart at approximately the molecular level, and his grandfather drags him through situations that would devastate trained soldiers. If you are a certain kind of person watching the show for the first time, Morty is embarrassing to watch. He is everything we are told we should not be. He is anxious and hesitant and reactive and small. He is not cool. He does not have Rick's confidence, or Summer's social ease, or even Beth's surgical precision. He is, on the surface, the least impressive person in every room he enters. And he is also, when you look at it from the right angle, the most important person in every room he enters. The show builds this case slowly, almost reluctantly, as if it does not want to make the argument too directly because that would spoil the experience of arriving at it yourself. But it is there. It has always been there. Morty's anxiety is not his weakness. It is his conscience. It is his humanity. And in a show full of beings of extraordinary power who have largely evacuated their humanity in exchange for capability, Morty's fear is the thing that keeps the moral center of the story from drifting into complete darkness. Here is the thing that Morty's anxiety actually does. Every time Rick is about to do something terrible, every time the plan involves costs that a normal person would refuse to pay, Morty's anxiety registers it. He flinches. He pushes back. He says, out loud, what a person with a working conscience is supposed to say in those moments. Most of the time, Rick overrides him. Most of the time, they do the thing anyway, and the thing is terrible. But Morty's reaction to the terrible thing is what keeps the audience grounded. It is what ensures the show is not simply endorsing Rick's worldview, which is one of comfortable nihilism and spectacular irresponsibility. Every time Morty is horrified, we are given permission to be horrified too. Every time Morty cries, the show acknowledges that something worth crying about has happened. The episode Rick Potion number 9 illustrates this with a kind of casual brutality that is almost admirable. Rick creates a love potion for Morty to use on his crush, Jessica. It goes wrong. Spectacularly, irreversibly, dimension-endingly wrong. The potion mutates, it spreads. Eventually, everyone on Earth, Everyone except close family who share Morty's DNA is transformed into a grotesque mutant creature running after Morty with terrifying devotion. Rick tries to fix it. He makes it worse. He makes it so much worse that the dimension becomes uninhabitable. And so he does what he does. He finds another dimension. One where a Rick and Morty have just died in an unrelated accident. He drags Morty there, and they take over the lives of their dead counterparts. And then they bury themselves in the backyard. Rick moves on almost immediately. He adjusts. He integrates. He is fine. He is more than fine. He barely breaks stride. This is just another Tuesday for a man who has watched himself die enough times that it has lost its gravity. Morty, meanwhile, is sitting on the couch staring at nothing. He cannot process it. He is 14, and he just watched his own dead body get put in the ground, and he is now pretending to be a version of himself that is not him, in a life that is not his life, and the girl he liked at school is a monster now, and he will never go back. That scene is where the show proves its thesis about Morty. His inability to just be fine about this is not a flaw. It is the appropriate human response to something inhuman. Rick's ease is not strength. It is damage. It is the result of having been through so many things so many times that the system that generates appropriate emotional responses has simply been worn down to nothing. Rick is not okay. He is numb. And the difference between those two states is vast. Morty's anxiety is also the source of his bravery. And this is the part that people miss when they look at anxiety as a problem to be solved, a bug in the system, a thing that should not be there. Bravery does not exist without fear. That is not a cliché. It is a structural truth. A person who feels no fear when doing a dangerous thing is not brave. They are indifferent. Bravery is specifically the thing that happens when you are afraid and you do it anyway. Every moment of genuine courage Morty has ever had, and he has had more than he gets credit for, has been built on a foundation of visible, trembling, very much their fear. He stands up to Rick when he is terrified of Rick. He goes on adventures when every part of him is screaming to stay home. He does the right thing in moments where the cost of doing the right thing is almost unbearable, and he does it while his hands are shaking. That is harder than anything Rick does. Rick acts boldly because he has no real fear of consequence. Morty acts boldly in spite of consequence that he feels with full intensity. The courage required for those two things is not comparable. The show also uses Morty to track something that real psychology would call accumulative trauma. In the earlier seasons, Morty is relatively intact. He is anxious but functional. He cares deeply, reacts strongly, bounces back. As the show progresses, you watch the baseline shift. He gets harder, he processes things faster, he does not cry as often. He picks up weapons with a kind of casual ease that was not there before. He makes decisions with a speed that was once not available to him. And every single time this happens, the show frames it as loss, not growth. There is an episode where Morty discovers he has been wiping his own memories, using a device to erase the worst of what he has been through so that he could keep functioning. And when the weight of all those erased experiences is suggested, the implication is staggering. The number of things that happened to him that were so bad he chose not to remember them is enormous. The Morty we have been watching, who seemed to be growing, was not growing. He was being whittled. He was being reduced. All of those erased traumas were not processed. They were just gone. And the Morty who came out the other side was lighter in the way that something is lighter when it has had pieces removed. Evil Morty is the show's most direct statement about what happens when a Morty's anxiety is completely gone. Evil Morty is a Morty who has moved past fear, past hesitation, past the moral trembling that keeps our Morty from becoming Rick. And what is Evil Morty? He is terrifying. He is cold and patient and absolutely without scruple. He is capable of manipulation on a scale that makes Rick look like an amateur. He wins. He wins everything. He wins in ways that our Morty never could, because our Morty would stop himself. Our Morty would feel the cost of what he was doing. Evil Morty has no such stops. The show is telling us something very clear through this. The anxiety that makes Morty inefficient, that makes him hesitant, that makes him ask too many questions and feel too many things and slow down when he should be moving, is the same thing that makes him good. It is the same thing that makes him someone worth watching, someone we root for, someone we recognize. It is the friction of conscience against impulse. Remove it and what you have is not a better Morty. What you have is something that looks like success and feels like horror. If you have ever been told that your anxiety is just a problem to fix, just a chemical imbalance to medicate into silence, just a weakness you need to overcome through sheer force of will, Rick and Morty has something to say to you. Your anxiety is telling you something. It is the emotional equivalent of pain. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is the body's way of saying something is wrong here. Pay attention, this needs care. Anxiety is the mind's version of the same signal. The task is not to eliminate it, but to learn to read it, to distinguish between the anxiety that is pointing at something real and the anxiety that is old programming running on a situation that does not need it. That is hard, careful, ongoing work. But the starting point is not treating your anxiety as the enemy. It is treating it as something that is trying to help you in the only language it knows. Morty is beloved by audiences across the world, not in spite of his anxiety, but because of it. Because we see ourselves in him. Because watching a 14-year-old boy be terrified in an alien landscape and still choose to do the right thing is something that does not stop being moving, no matter how many times you see it. He is the show's argument for the value of staying human in inhuman circumstances. For feeling things even when feeling them is harder than not feeling them. For carrying your fear with you rather than discarding it, because the fear is not your weakness. It is your proof that things still matter to you. And as long as things still matter to you, you are still in the game. Section 3. The Pickle Rick Problem: Why We Avoid Ourselves. Let us sit with Pickle Rick for a while longer, because the episode rewards it. We touched on it in the section about Rick, but the lessons inside this episode go beyond Rick Sanchez specifically. They reach out and grab hold of something universal, something that almost everyone watching this show has felt at some point in their life without necessarily having the language for it. The premise, stripped to its essentials, is this. A man turns himself into a pickle to avoid having a conversation about how he feels. He then spends an entire day in extreme physical danger, fighting off hundreds of people, nearly dying multiple times, and ends up covered in blood and waste. And when he finally arrives at the therapy session he was avoiding, a therapist quietly points out that the adventure he chose was not really an adventure. It was the most elaborate avoidance tactic she has ever seen. Let that sit for a second. He turned himself into a pickle rather than sit in a room with his feelings. The writer Dan Harmon confirmed later that the whole episode is a metaphor. Pickle Rick is drunk Rick. The pickle brine is alcohol. The whole subterranean adventure is what an addict experiences when they binge, the grotesque and fascinating and adrenaline-soaked chaos that is, at its heart, just a person lying in a gutter. Rick emerges from the sewer triumphant, in the way that people who are drinking to forget something sometimes feel triumphant, for exactly as long as the high lasts. And then he is sitting across from a therapist, still reeking of everything he was running from. The therapist does not mock him for this. Dr. Wong is, notably, not cruel. She is not dismissive. She does not minimize Rick's intelligence or his accomplishments. She acknowledges them. She acknowledges that his mind is genuinely extraordinary, and then she makes the point that changes the entire shape of the episode, retroactively and in real time. She says that therapy is not an adventure. It is not a test of strength. It is just work. Like brushing your teeth. Like taking care of yourself in the boring, unglamorous, daily way that self-care actually operates. It's not an adventure, she says. It's just work. And this is the thing that breaks Rick, or comes closest to breaking him, in the entire series. Not an alien threat. Not a superpowered enemy. Not death itself, which he has arranged to survive multiple times. The thing that undoes him most completely is the suggestion that fixing himself would require doing something ordinary. That the path through his pain is not through a dimension portal or a dangerous experiment, but through the slow, repetitive, deeply human work of paying attention to himself. Not as a challenge to be conquered. Not as a puzzle to be solved, just as maintenance, just as care. This is where the episode connects to real life in a way that feels almost uncomfortable in its accuracy. Because the reason people avoid therapy, the reason people avoid honest conversations, the reason people avoid any form of genuine introspection is not usually that they think it will not work. It is that it does not feel like enough. It does not feel like it matches the scale of the pain. If you have been through something genuinely terrible, if you have carried something for a long time, The idea of sitting in a room and talking about it quietly can feel almost insulting. The pain feels like it deserves a more dramatic response. It feels like it should require something more extreme, more physical, more visible. Rick literally invented a way to feel like he was doing something about his problems that looked exactly like the most heroic, the most difficult, the most impressive thing imaginable. He was in a sewer, constructing robotic armor from dead rats, fighting his way through a paramilitary compound. He was a pickle. He was a pickle fighting trained agents in a building with blast doors and armed guards. And it was all, in the eyes of the therapist, simpler and sadder than she could quite articulate without being unkind. He would rather be a wounded pickle in a sewer than a man on a couch. We all do this. The scale changes, but the mechanism does not. We would rather work 16-hour days than sit quietly with the thing we are avoiding. We would rather start another project, take another trip, pick another fight, scroll for another hour, pour another drink, then stop and do the boring, terrifying work of asking ourselves what is actually wrong and why we will not look at it. We make the avoidance feel productive. We make it look like something. We dress it up in the costume of capability or ambition or self-discipline, and we send it out into the world and hope nobody asks what is underneath. The lesson of Pickle Rick is not that you should go to therapy, though the show clearly thinks you should, and it is worth noting that by the end of the episode, Morty and Summer both want to keep going. The adults, Rick and Beth, make plans to go drinking instead. The show notices that. The lesson is broader than therapy specifically. The lesson is this: the thing you are working the hardest to avoid looking at is almost certainly the thing most worth looking at. The energy you spend in avoidance is enormous. It costs more than you realize, and often the thing on the other side of looking, the thing you are so desperately circling around, is not even as terrible as the circling itself. Dr. Wong also says something in this episode that applies to Beth as much as it does to Rick. She observes that Beth admires Rick for seeming not to need anything from anyone, and she says it in a tone that makes clear this is not a compliment. Beth has learned, from watching her father her whole life, that needing things is a weakness. That vulnerability is something to be defended against rather than embraced. That intelligence and self-sufficiency are the currency of worth in this family, and needing help is a form of bankruptcy. This pattern, this specific inheritance, explains an enormous amount about Beth that we will explore in a later section. But here, in this episode, the show is noting that avoidance is not just a personal quirk. It is transmissible. It moves through families. It teaches itself to children who are watching their parents not look at things and learning from that demonstration that not looking is what strong people do. The final image of Pickle Rick is not Rick triumphing over his enemies. It is Rick in a therapy office, dripping, defeated, having survived everything he was willing to go through rather than just come here in the first place. And the therapist looks at him with something that is not quite pity but is close to it, and she just says what she sees. And he has no answer for it. His enormous brain, which has never once been at a loss, has nothing to say, because she is not wrong, and he knows it. That silence is worth more than anything else in the episode. That silence is the show telling us what health actually requires. Not cleverness, not skill, not the ability to build robotic armor from dead rats. Just the willingness to be quiet in a room with yourself and let what is true be true. Section 4. The 60 Minutes Truth: Nobody exists on purpose, and that's okay. There is an episode in the first season that barely has a plot. Rick installs interdimensional cable, the family watches weird television from alternate realities, and in the background of all that absurdist comedy, something quietly devastating happens. The family discovers what their lives would have looked like if they had made different choices. And that discovery tears them apart. Jerry sees himself as a famous movie star. Beth sees herself as a successful surgeon who actually operates on people, not horses. Both of them see versions of themselves that are, by any conventional metric, more impressive than the people they actually became. And the thing that becomes clear almost immediately is that those alternate versions of themselves, the ones they are now comparing themselves to with a kind of sick fascination, are not exactly happy. Alternate movie star Jerry has a breakdown on television. Alternate accomplished Beth is alone in a house full of exotic birds. But knowing this does not help, because the comparison has already poisoned something. Beth and Jerry, looking at who they could have been, start to see each other as the reason they are not those people. Beth starts to see Jerry as the accident that redirected her life. Jerry starts to hear the voice in Beth's head, the one she never quite says out loud, the one that wonders what life would have looked like if she had not kept the baby. And then Summer finds out she was almost not kept. She finds out that her parents considered a different choice, and she starts to pack to run away, because what is the point of staying in a family that almost chose not to have you? Morty follows her upstairs. He does not bring a speech prepared. He does not bring a cliché. He brings something stranger and truer. He takes her outside and shows her the graves in the backyard, 2 bodies under the dirt that are him and Rick from this dimension, and he tells her the truth, that he is not her real brother. He is a brother from somewhere else, someone who took the place of the person who should be here. And then he says the thing that has echoed through 10 years of this show's cultural life. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV. I want to spend some time with those words, because they are much richer than they look. And they have been misread regularly and earnestly as a nihilistic shrug, a teenage eye roll dressed up as philosophy. But that is not what they are. The show's own framing tells you this, if you pay attention to it. Morty does not say this and then stare at the ceiling with an expression of blank acceptance. He says it as comfort. He says it to someone who is in pain. He says it right after showing her the most extreme possible evidence of how random and impermanent everything is. And the invitation at the end is not to nothing. It is to connection. Come watch TV. Come be with me. In the fact of all this randomness and impermanence and accidental existence, come be here with me right now, because right now is what we have. This is not nihilism. This is its opposite. Nihilism says nothing matters. What Morty is saying is more subtle than that. He is saying that meaning is not something the universe provides. The universe does not care whether you exist. It did not plan you. It did not arrange for you to arrive. You are here because of a chain of accidents, so long and improbable that the mind genuinely cannot hold it. And once you really accept that, once you really feel the weight of how random all of this is, you arrive at one of 2 places. You can arrive at despair, which is Rick's default. If nothing is inherently meaningful, then why bother? If your existence was not planned or intended, then you are just noise in an enormous system that has no particular interest in you. That is one road out of the realization. Or you can arrive at a strange kind of freedom. If nothing is inherently meaningful, then you are the one who decides what meaning looks like. The universe did not give you a purpose, which means it also did not take one away. The fact that you are here at all, the staggering improbability of it, is not evidence that nothing matters. It is evidence that something is happening. You are happening, and the people around you are happening, and the moments between you and them are happening, and they will end and they will not come back, and there is no cosmic significance attached to them other than the significance you choose to attach. Morty is not telling Summer that she does not matter. He is telling her that her mattering is not contingent on whether her parents planned for her. It is not contingent on whether the universe intended her. It is not measurable by comparison to some alternate version of herself who made different choices. She matters because she is here, and he is here, and they are brothers in the only sense that counts, which is that they chose each other and they are choosing this moment right now. The lesson inside 60 Minutes is one that the show carries across multiple seasons in different forms. The comparison trap is one of the most reliable ways to make yourself miserable that human psychology has yet devised. Looking at what your life could have been, what someone else's life is, what the alternate version of you is doing right now in some dimension you cannot access, is not information. It is noise. It is the specific kind of noise that makes the life you are actually living feel like a consolation prize when it is not. It is your one actual life. It is the one you are in. And the people in it are real, and they are here, and they will not be here forever. The family at the end of 60 Minutes, after all the pain of the alternate life comparisons, after Beth and Jerry nearly end their marriage and Summer nearly runs away, comes back together. Not with a neat resolution, not with a bow on it. They come back together because they choose to, because the alternate lives they glimpsed did not actually look better on inspection. Because the life you have, with all its compromises and accidents and imperfections, is the one that has your actual people in it. And your actual people, with all their flaws, are the ones whose names you know. There is also something worth sitting with about what this episode says about regret specifically. Both Beth and Jerry have been quietly carrying regret about the choices that led to their current lives. Beth regrets not becoming a surgeon. Jerry regrets not having become famous. And the show does not tell them that they should not feel this way. The feelings are real. The losses were real. Choices were made that closed other doors. That is just true. But the alternate Jerry on television is having a nervous breakdown. And the alternate Beth is alone. The grass looks greener on the other side of every major life decision you have ever made. That is not evidence that the other side is actually greener. It is evidence that the human imagination is very good at imagining a version of an unlived life that conveniently omits the parts that would have been just as difficult as the life you actually lived. No life is without cost. No version of yourself is without struggle. The question is not which life had no pain. The question is, which life's pain was worth paying? And you cannot know the answer to that from a television set showing you someone else. You can only know it from the one you are in. Section 5. Jerry Smith and the Quiet Courage of Just Being Human. Jerry Smith is the show's designated object of contempt. Rick calls him stupid to his face, with the casual regularity of someone who has long since stopped expecting this to land as cruelty. Beth spends multiple seasons quietly questioning her choice to stay with him. Even his children, people he created and raised and loves with a completeness that the show does not always give him credit for, treat him as a slightly embarrassing fact about their lives, rather than a person who made them possible. The show wants you to laugh at Jerry. It earns those laughs. Jerry is objectively, consistently, hilariously bad at almost everything the show's world values. He is not smart. He is not capable. He is not skilled. He is not impressive. He has an ordinary job that he loses with impressive regularity and regains through luck as much as effort. He is clumsy in social situations. He is insecure in a way that expresses itself through other people rather than just sitting quietly in him. He needs approval so visibly that it becomes a kind of vulnerability that the people around him seem almost unable to not exploit. And he is, measured against the emotional scale of what Rick and Morty is actually about, possibly the most important character in the show. Let me explain why. Rick and Morty is, at its deepest level, a show about what happens when people run from their humanity. Rick runs from it through intelligence. Beth runs from it through her relationship with her father. Summer runs from it through image and social performance. Morty is slowly having it worn away by the things he has been through. The show keeps showing us, from different angles, the same question. What is the cost of this particular kind of escape? Jerry does not escape. Jerry is a human being living a human life in its plainest possible form, and the show puts him in a world that has absolute contempt for that. He is surrounded by beings of extraordinary capability who have organized their entire sense of worth around what they can do, and he cannot do most of those things. And the remarkable thing about Jerry, the thing the show builds slowly and then makes undeniable, is that he survives. Not just technically, he actually survives. He keeps showing up, he keeps loving, he keeps trying. He fails spectacularly and repeatedly, and he does not learn to fail gracefully, but he does not quit. There is an episode where Jerry is sent to an alien daycare while the adults go on an adventure. The alien daycare turns out to be a kind of paradise where Jerry is surrounded by beings who genuinely like him, who find his particular combination of qualities charming rather than pathetic. He is, for the first time in the show's run, not the least impressive person in the room, and he flourishes in a way that is both funny and oddly moving. He does not become a different person. He does not suddenly develop abilities he never had. He just gets to exist without being quietly told he is not enough. And it turns out that without that constant low-level pressure, Jerry is actually pretty okay. That episode is the show making a point about environment. Jerry is not intrinsically pathetic. He has been made pathetic by being in a context that constantly measures him against standards that are not his standards and finds him lacking. Remove him from that context, and he is a man who knows how to be kind, how to be present, how to enjoy small things, how to love the people he is with without needing those people to be anything other than what they are. The insecurity that defines him is real, and it does cause damage. His need for approval does make him do embarrassing things. His inability to hold his ground in conflicts does have costs for his marriage and his family. The show does not pretend otherwise. But it also shows us, in the moment when Jerry forces Beth to choose between him and Rick, that Jerry's supposed weakness carries a power that nobody gives him credit for. He asked for the thing he needed. He said the words. He held his position long enough for it to matter. And Beth chose him. Rick had to leave the house. Rick Sanchez, the most capable being in the universe, was asked to leave a suburban house by the man everyone had spent 3 seasons treating as a punchline. And he left. Jerry's insecurity is his wound. But the wound is also the thing that keeps him human. It is the thing that keeps him reaching toward the people he loves, rather than retreating from them the way Rick retreats. It is the thing that makes him tell Beth he loves her, in situations where Rick would have made a joke and changed the subject. It is the thing that makes him keep trying, when a more self-possessed person might have decided the cost was not worth it and moved on. There is also something the show is saying about ordinary lives that deserves more attention than it usually gets. The characters in this show are surrounded by evidence, constant and overwhelming, that the scale of the universe makes ordinary existence irrelevant. Rick has access to infinite dimensions. He has seen civilizations rise and fall. He has watched species destroy themselves for reasons that seemed important and were not. He has the kind of perspective that should make one human family in one suburban house look like barely a pixel in an image that goes on forever, and yet he stays. Not always, not consistently, not without enormous damage along the way, but he keeps coming back. And the thing he keeps coming back to is not the portal gun or the lab or the next adventure. It is Beth. It is the family in the house. It is Jerry's infuriating, persistent, unkillable ordinariness. Because in a universe of infinite possibility and infinite impermanence, there is something about a man who just loves his family and shows up every day without any extraordinary capabilities to offer that Rick cannot quite walk away from. Jerry does not know this about himself. He does not have access to this framing of his own life. He sees himself as Rick sees him, mostly. He measures himself against Rick's standards and finds himself wanting, but the show keeps gently, insistently suggesting that his standards are not the right ones. That being able to build a portal gun is not the measure of a person. That what Jerry can do, the unspectacular, consistent, unglamorous work of showing up and caring, is its own form of extraordinary. The lesson Jerry carries is the one that is hardest to hear in a culture that worships capability and achievement and scale. You do not have to be the smartest person in the room to be worth the room. You do not have to be exceptional in a measurable way to have value. The quiet, persistent, ordinary act of loving people and showing up for them, of being present without being impressive, is not lesser than the genius's contribution. In many ways, it is harder. Anyone can be brilliant and detached. Being ordinary and fully present is something that takes a different kind of courage. Jerry Smith is the show's argument for that courage. He is the argument for the value of being exactly what you are, in a universe that would prefer you to be something more interesting, without apology. Section 6. Beth's wound, the cost of living for someone else's approval. Beth Smith is the character the show treats most carefully. More carefully than Rick, which is saying something, and more carefully than Morty, who gets the most screen time. Beth is treated carefully because what is true about her is very close to something that is true about enormous numbers of people, and the show seems to understand that getting it wrong would be a particular kind of unkindness. Beth is a surgeon. She operates on horses rather than people, which is a distinction she feels as a wound, though she rarely articulates it directly. She is brilliant, as you would expect from Rick's daughter. She is driven and capable and perceptive in ways that go largely unrecognized by the people around her. She has built a life, a house and a marriage and 2 children and a career and a dinner table and a schedule and all the other visible furniture of an adult existence. She has done all the things that are supposed to add up to a life. And she is organized entirely around a question she has been asking since childhood and has never been able to fully answer. Does my father love me? Not love in the technical sense. Not love in the sense of providing resources or showing up when asked. Love in the sense of seeing her, of choosing her, of staying. The specific love that a parent withholds, not out of cruelty necessarily, but out of incapacity or preoccupation, or the kind of damage that makes certain expressions of care impossible, is one of the most durable wounds a person can carry. Beth has been carrying it since Rick left when she was young and did not come back for years. She has been carrying it through every choice she has made as an adult. The show makes a case, with considerable care, that almost every major decision of Beth's adult life has been shaped by this question and by the absence of a certain answer. She married Jerry at least partly because Jerry was absolutely, visibly, undeniably not going to leave. That is not a romantic reason to marry someone. But for a person whose foundational experience of love is that the person you love most has a tendency to disappear, the appeal of someone who is there, reliably and consistently and sometimes irritatingly there, is not trivial. Jerry's very ordinariness, his very lack of the adventurousness and exceptionalism that Rick embodies, is part of what made him feel safe. He was not going anywhere interesting enough to go to without her. When Rick returns and moves into her house, Beth's behavior becomes the most revealing thing in the show about how parental wounds operate in adult life. She overlooks things, she makes excuses, she defends him in situations where defense is objectively hard to mount. She lets Morty go on adventures that she knows involve genuine danger. She does not push back when pushing back would be reasonable, and reasonable is actually the minimum the situation requires. And she does all of this because the thing she is most afraid of in the world is Rick leaving again. Not for any practical reason. Not because his presence in the house is straightforwardly good for her or her family, but because she has never recovered from the first time he left. That wound is still open. That question is still there. Does he love me enough to stay? And she will pay almost any price to keep the circumstances that allow her to keep asking the question rather than face a definitive answer. This is one of the most precisely observed things in the entire show, and it is painful precisely because it is so familiar. The ways we reshape our lives, our relationships, our choices, around the approval of one person, often a person from our past, often a parent, is something that psychology has spent a great deal of time trying to understand and help people move past. Beth's version of it is extreme, because Rick is an extreme person who was absent in an extreme way. But the mechanism is universal. Think about how many decisions people make, not on the basis of what they want or need, but on the basis of what they imagine some specific person would think of them. A parent, usually, but not always. Sometimes a teacher who mattered, sometimes an older sibling. Sometimes a person who told you something about yourself when you were young and impressionable, and you have been either proving them right or proving them wrong ever since. The person does not even need to be present. They do not need to know they are involved. They are just there, in the architecture of your choices, quietly shaping the things you allow yourself to want and the things you tell yourself you do not deserve. Beth's relationship with this wound comes to a head most explicitly when Rick offers her the choice of her life. He offers to clone her, to make a perfect copy who will stay and live the life she currently has, while the real Beth goes off and explores the universe and becomes the version of herself she always imagined she could be. It is the most extraordinary offer anyone has ever made to a person. It is the offer of a second life, and Beth cannot answer it. She is paralyzed not because the choice is hard in a practical sense, but because whatever she chooses, it is really about Rick. If she stays partly because staying is close to her father, because the family life she built is the thing that brought him back and keeps him there. If she leaves to be like Rick, to go adventuring in the way that Rick adventures, to prove that she is his daughter in the most complete sense. Either choice is organized around him. She has not been able to locate a version of the decision that is just about Beth. The show does not present Beth as weak for this. It presents her as someone who was shaped in a particular way during a formative period and has been doing her best with the shape she was given. The compassion in how Beth is written is one of the show's most underrated qualities. She can be cold, she can be selfish, she can be, as the show eventually implies, capable of things that suggest some of Rick's darker capacities live in her as well. But she is also, underneath all of that, a woman who wanted her father to stay when she was a little girl and never entirely recovered from the fact that he did not. The lesson here is about the origin of the stories we tell ourselves about what we are worth and what we deserve. Those stories usually have a source. They were usually written by someone, often without their knowledge or intention. And the question worth asking, the question the show keeps circling around without ever quite saying directly, is whether you are still living by a story that was written for you by someone who did not actually know you as well as they seem to. Whether the version of yourself you have been performing is the one you chose, or the one you inherited. Whether the approval you have been working for was ever really available in the way you needed it to be and what it means to need it anyway, Beth, at her best, in the moments the show allows her to breathe, is extraordinary. She is smart and perceptive and capable of a warmth that the family dynamic usually keeps from having room to fully express itself. The Beth who exists underneath the daughter organized around Rick's opinion of her is genuinely interesting and genuinely good. The show keeps offering glimpses of that Beth, as if to remind us in her that she is there, that she exists independent of the wound. That is probably the most hopeful thing the show does with her. Section 7. Unity and the lesson about love, control, and letting go. Autoerotic assimilation is one of the most unexpectedly devastating episodes of television I have ever watched. And I do not use that word casually. Devastating. The kind of thing that starts as comedy and ends with a man lying face down on his workbench having barely not killed himself, and the credits roll over the sounds of his garage. Unity is a hive mind. This means unity is literally many people simultaneously, an entire planet's worth of individuals all sharing one consciousness. Unity can make anyone do anything by assimilating them. Unity has conquered worlds. Unity is, by any measure, an extraordinary being of extraordinary power. And Unity loves Rick, or something that functions as love, as close to love as a planet-spanning consciousness can manage. When Rick and Unity reconnect in this episode, after what we understand to be years of separation, the reunion is genuinely joyful. It is also immediately recognizable as a disaster in slow motion, the way that reunions with certain people are. The ones where you know as soon as you see them that this is going to be wonderful and it is going to be terrible and you are going to do it anyway because the pull is stronger than the knowledge. Rick and Unity's relationship is the show's most honest portrait of what people in recovery circles sometimes call a relationship addiction, not romantic in the way that word is usually understood, not dependent in the way that clinical definitions capture, but deeply, systemically, mutually destructive in a way that feels, from the inside, like love. Because what they give each other is a form of ease. Around Unity, Rick does not have to be careful. Around Unity, Rick does not have to pretend to be less than he is. There is no performance required, no social maintenance, no careful management of how much of himself he shows. Unity can handle all of him. Unity is big enough to contain all of Rick without flinching. And Rick, in turn, gives Unity something Unity cannot give itself: full and complete permission to be completely itself. Unity, as a being that works by assimilating other consciousnesses, exists in a permanent state of negotiating between order and individual identity. Around Rick, those negotiations stop. Rick does not need Unity to manage itself for his comfort. He invites the chaos. He amplifies it. And for a being that has spent its existence carefully maintaining control over a planet's worth of people, the relief of having someone who actively wants the uncontrolled version of you is intoxicating. The problem is what happens to the planet while they are having the time of their lives. Unity, so thoroughly distracted by Rick's presence, loses its grip on the population it is supposed to be managing. The assimilated beings start to regain their individual consciousness, and almost immediately, a race war breaks out. Not a metaphorical race war, a literal one. Because it turns out these beings, separated from Unity's unifying consciousness, hate each other in a way that required constant active management to suppress. Summer, watching this unfold, makes the observation that this is happening because Unity got drunk with Rick. And she is right. And the show does not let her or us feel entirely smug about that. Because the alternative, the fully sober Unity managing the planet without Rick's influence, meant no freedom for anyone. The show asks whether the peace was worth the control it required. It does not answer. What it does answer is what happens to Rick when Unity, in one of the most genuinely moving breakup letters in any medium, leaves notes across an entire planet's worth of bodies explaining why she has to go. The notes say, "Rick, I realize now I'm attracted to you for the same reason I can't be with you. You can't change. And I have no problem with that, but it clearly means I have a problem with myself. I know how it goes with us. I lose who I am and become part of you." That is the thing about certain relationships. Certain connections that feel, from the inside, like wholeness are actually you disappearing into someone else. Not because the other person is bad, not because they are doing something intentionally harmful, but because the gravity of their personality, their needs, their way of being in the world is so powerful that it rearranges you. And the rearrangement feels like belonging. It feels like finally being understood. It feels like the first time you have ever been fully seen. And it is, simultaneously, the slow erasure of the self that needed to be seen. Unity's letter is one of the clearest descriptions of this pattern that I have encountered anywhere. She is attracted to Rick for the same reason she cannot be with him. The quality that draws her in is the quality that makes the relationship impossible to survive inside of. Rick cannot change. Rick's absolute commitment to his own vision of himself, his utter refusal to be reshaped by other people's needs or expectations, is the thing that made Unity feel safe enough to stop managing herself. And it is also the thing that means there is no room in the relationship for Unity to grow into something that is not simply Rick-shaped. Rick, after reading the notes, after the planet empties out and he is alone on a world full of farewell messages written in handwriting that is not quite his but knows him completely, goes home. And he builds the thing in his garage, and he almost pulls the trigger. The lesson about love that this episode contains is not that love is dangerous. It is that love that requires you to disappear is not sustainable, and attempting to sustain it is one of the most painful things a person can try to do. The feeling of finally being seen, of finally being with someone who does not ask you to be smaller, who can hold all of you, is one of the most powerful experiences available to human beings. And when that feeling comes inside a dynamic that is actually consuming rather than nourishing, the experience of leaving it is one of the most disorienting losses there is. Because you are not just losing the person, you are losing the experience of being fully present with someone. You are losing the moment when you felt, maybe for the first time, like you did not have to edit yourself for someone else's comfort. Unity losing Rick is devastating for this reason. Rick losing Unity is devastating for this reason. They were, in the words of the letter, two alike. They both turn others into mirrors. Rick does it through force of personality. Unity does it through assimilation. Neither of them can be in a relationship without eventually consuming it. And loving each other meant consuming each other, and they are both too large to be consumed, so all that love had nowhere to go except into the growing destruction of everything around them. The practical application of this, the thing you can carry out of the episode and into your actual life, is a question worth asking about the important relationships in your own life. Does being with this person make you more yourself or less yourself? Does the dynamic you have with this person expand you or contract you? Does loving them require you to become smaller, quieter, less present in your own life? And conversely, are you the one in this dynamic who takes up all the space, whose needs and personality leave no room for the other person to exist independently? Neither role is safe to be in. Both roles are common. Both roles feel, from the inside, like love. And both roles carry a cost that eventually comes due. Unity made the right choice leaving. The show acknowledges this. Rick, lying face down on his workbench, having nearly killed himself, would probably acknowledge it too if he were in a condition to have the conversation. Sometimes the most loving thing a relationship can do is end. Not because the love was not real, not because the connection was not significant, but because what the connection required was not compatible with either person surviving it intact. Section 8. The Central Finite Curve. The cage you build around your own greatness. For 5 seasons, the Central Finite Curve was a phrase that appeared occasionally in the show's background mythology, a thing Rick referenced without fully explaining. A structural detail in the show's cosmology that felt like world-building texture rather than plot. And then, in the Season 5 finale, it became the most important concept in the entire series, and everything that had come before it rearranged itself around this new understanding. Here is what the Central Finite Curve is, as the show eventually explains it. The multiverse in the Rick and Morty universe is genuinely infinite. There are an infinite number of dimensions, an infinite number of versions of every possible reality. This is not hyperbole. It is the actual structure of the show's universe. Infinite dimensions, infinite possibilities. In some of those dimensions, Rick is the smartest being who exists. In others, Rick is ordinary. In others, Rick does not exist at all. In some dimensions, someone else entirely occupies the position of most capable, most powerful, most dominant intelligence. Rick, along with a group of his counterparts, built a machine, And that machine walled off the infinite multiverse into two sections. On one side of the wall, all the dimensions where Rick is the smartest being in existence. On the other side of the wall, all the dimensions where he is not. And the portal guns that Ricks use, the technology that allows interdimensional travel, was designed to only open portals inside the walled section. The section where Rick is always on top. Every adventure Rick has ever gone on has happened inside a universe where Rick is guaranteed to be the most capable being present. Every alien civilization he has outthought, every galactic government he has dismantled, every villain he has defeated, every threat he has survived, has happened in conditions that were designed by Rick himself to ensure his dominance. The infinite multiverse is real and it is genuinely infinite, but Rick has never once allowed himself to enter a dimension where he might not win. He walled those dimensions out. He built a fence around his own greatness that ensured his greatness would never truly be tested. When Evil Morty explains this to Rick, there is a silence that does something I have rarely seen a piece of animation achieve. The weight of the implication lands visually, in the stillness of the frame and the absence of Rick's usual immediate response. Because Morty is not just telling him something about the structure of the multiverse, he is telling him something about his psychology. Rick built the central finite curve for reasons he presented as practical. He needed to hunt Rick Prime. He needed to limit his search to dimensions where the person he was hunting might be. This is probably partly true, but the show is honest about the other part, which is that a man who had just lost everything to someone who was, in some cosmic sense, a peer, a version of himself, built a system that guaranteed he would never have to face a genuine peer again. He walled himself into a section of reality where he would always be the smartest, always the most powerful, always the winner, or at least always the most capable person in the room. This is, at its heart, a story about what fear can build when it has genius-level resources to work with. We all do some version of this. The central finite curve is an extreme cosmological version of something that happens in much more modest ways in ordinary lives all the time. We engineer the conditions of our lives to reduce the likelihood of genuine challenge. We choose careers where our existing strengths are the ones that are rewarded. Not because those careers are most meaningful, but because they are the ones where we already know we can win. We choose relationships where we are the more capable, more intelligent, more accomplished partner, not because the dynamic is healthy, but because we are afraid of what it feels like to be the lesser person in a relationship. We choose friends who do not really challenge us. We stay in rooms where we already know the answers. We avoid the situations where we might genuinely fail, where the outcome is not pre-engineered, where there is someone in the room who is smarter, or more capable, or more perceptive, and we would have to reckon with that. The central finite curve is the show's image for this. It is the wall you build around your own experience to guarantee that what you encounter will confirm what you already know about yourself. And it feels like control. It feels like intelligence. It feels like strategy. But it is really fear wearing the costume of capability. The cost of this walling is invisible for a long time. From inside the curve, everything looks fine. Rick is always the smartest. He always wins. The system works. But what the system has actually done is remove the possibility of genuine growth. You cannot grow in conditions that are designed to guarantee your dominance. You can only become more and more skilled at the version of yourself that already exists. The dimensions outside the curve, the ones where Rick is not the smartest, where someone else has solved the problems he thought were uniquely his to solve, where there are intelligences that would genuinely challenge him, those are the dimensions that could actually change him. And he walled them out entirely. Simple Rick, who exists in the show's mythology as a Rick who was too many iterations off the central finite curve to properly fit into the Citadel's system, is happy in a way that the other Ricks are not. He found his peace in watching his daughter be happy. He stopped chasing the infinite. He settled into a life that was small enough to love properly. The Citadel exploits his happiness for commercial purposes, farming his contentment into a product which is both deeply disturbing and perfectly on brand for the Ricks. But Simple Rick himself is, in the relevant sense, free. He has no curve, he has no wall, he has just the small, real, finite life in front of him. And it turns out that is enough, more than enough. The invitation in this section of the show's mythology is not to be less capable. It is not to stop trying to be good at things. It is to notice when you have organized your life around the guarantee of winning rather than the possibility of growing. The difference between those two orientations is enormous, even though they can look almost identical from the outside. The person who avoids all situations where they might genuinely fail is performing capability. The person who seeks situations where they might genuinely fail is developing it. One of those people is living inside a central finite curve of their own construction. The other one is in the actual multiverse. Section 9. Evil Morty's Revolution? Why you must refuse your assigned role. Evil Morty is the most terrifying character in Rick and Morty. Not because of what he does, though what he does is genuinely on an extraordinary scale. Not because he is physically powerful or armed with exotic weapons. What makes him terrifying is the patience. The absolute, unbroken, year-spanning patience of someone who decided very quietly and very early that they were not going to accept the role they had been assigned. Every Morty in the multiverse, within the central finite curve, exists in a specific relationship to a specific Rick. They are sidekicks. The term is clinical and accurate. Mortys serve as companions whose brainwaves complement Rick's, masking their presence from detection systems. They are selected for their complementary qualities, their anxiety, their average intelligence, their emotional softness, all of which provide useful contrast to Rick's coldness and capability. They go to school on the Citadel's Morty-focused curriculum, which is designed to prepare them to be good sidekicks and not much more. They are not encouraged to lead. They are not given the tools for independence. The system they live inside was built around the assumption that they never would want those tools, because why would a sidekick want to stop being a sidekick? Evil Morty wanted to stop being a sidekick. The first time he appears in the show, in the episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind in the first season, he is hidden in plain sight. He is standing among a group of apparently victimized Mortys, having constructed an entire elaborate scheme involving a controlled Rick doing terrible things to other Mortys, all to cover his tracks, all to remain invisible while moving his pieces into position. The reveal at the end of the episode that the villain was not a Rick but a Morty is one of the great reveals in the show's history. Not because it is shocking, though it is. Because of what it says about the assumptions built into the system, the Citadel's entire structure depends on Mortys being incapable of this. The Ricks never suspected a Morty because the possibility did not fit into their model of what a Morty is. Their arrogance, their absolute confidence in their own superiority, created a blind spot directly in the shape of a Morty who had decided not to be what he was supposed to be. The thing the Ricks were most certain about, that a Morty could not constitute a real threat, was the exact thing Evil Morty turned into his primary advantage. He goes on to do something that, within the logic of the Citadel's universe, should be impossible. He runs for president of the Citadel of Ricks, a Morty running for the top position in a society built by and for Ricks. The Ricks laugh at this. They should be terrified. He wins. And winning was not even his goal. Becoming president of the Citadel was a step. An intermediate step. He did not want to rule the system. He wanted to use the system's resources to break through the central finite curve and reach the part of the multiverse that the Ricks had sealed away, the part where they were not automatically the most powerful things in existence, the part where a Morty might actually have a chance at a life that was his own rather than someone else's accessory. He succeeds. The curve breaks. He leaves. He does not stay to accept applause. He does not turn around. He does not make a speech. He leaves behind an enormous amount of destruction, and he flies through the gap in reality into a part of the multiverse that no portal gun has ever reached, and he disappears. There are things the show invites us to be troubled by in Evil Morty's arc. He causes enormous suffering. Ricks die. Mortys die. The scale of what he dismantles to get where he is going is catastrophic. The show does not present him as a hero. It presents him as something more complicated and more interesting than a hero. It presents him as someone who correctly identified that the system was rigged, correctly understood that the only way to change a rigged system was to become more capable of using it than the people it was rigged for, and then did exactly that, without the hesitation or moral trembling that would have stopped a less resolved person. He is not meant to be admirable in a simple sense, but the show does ask you to understand him. And understanding him means understanding something about systems and the people who are kept at the bottom of them. Every system that has ever existed has been built by the people at the top of it and organized to maintain the conditions that put those people at the top. This is not conspiracy. It is just how power operates when it is not examined. The Citadel was built by Ricks who believed they were exceptional, who organized a civilization around that belief, and who could not see a Morty as a threat because their model of the universe did not have a slot for that kind of threat. They built the system. They ran the system. They benefited from the system. And they were so confident in the system's architecture that they never really considered the possibility that someone at the bottom might see it clearly enough to dismantle it. This is the show's most overtly political narrative. The parallels between the Citadel and real-world power structures are not subtle and were not intended to be, but they translate into personal terms as well, because the story of Evil Morty is also the story of anyone who was told, by their family or their community or their culture or their own internalized model of their capabilities, that they were not the kind of person who got to do a certain thing, that they were the sidekick type, not the hero type, that their role was to support, to enable, to follow, to serve, that the kind of life they wanted was not available to them because it was not what people like them did. Evil Morty's answer to being told what kind of person he was is a complete refusal. Not a gradual, careful, socially acceptable resistance. A total, comprehensive, years-long strategic refusal that ends with him walking through a door in the wall of reality and disappearing into a universe where nobody has told him what he is. You do not have to blow up a space station to take something from this. The applicable version is this. The story of your limitations is almost always a story that was written by someone it benefited to write it. The ceiling you have accepted is almost always a ceiling that someone built and then asked you to agree with. The role you have been playing, if it has always been the supporting role, if it has always been the role that serves someone else's narrative, is a role that was cast by someone with interests of their own. And the question Evil Morty's arc puts on the table is simple, though the answer is never simple. What would you do if you genuinely refused to accept the role you were given? You do not have to be certain the answer is right. You do not have to have Evil Morty's cold patience or his willingness to pay any price. You just have to start asking the question. You just have to let the possibility sit in your mind that the size of the life you have been imagining for yourself was determined by the imagination of people who were not thinking about you, who were thinking about their own comfort, their own systems, their own need to remain the smartest person in the room. The portal opens. The color is different. The universe on the other side is one nobody designed for Rick's benefit. And Evil Morty, the version of a Morty who refused to be a Morty, flies through it toward whatever is on the other side of the only cage he ever really lived in. Section 10. What Rick and Morty ultimately teaches about being alive. We have spent a long time in this show's universe, moving through its most important ideas, and I want to end where all of it really points. Not at a theory, not at a critique. At something smaller and harder and more valuable than either of those. Rick and Morty is, at its most essential, a show about the terror of love. Not love as an emotion, love as a vulnerability. Love is the place where your defenses stop working, where all the intelligence and capability and performance cannot help you, where you are just a person who wants something from another person and does not know if you are going to get it. That is what the show keeps returning to. That is the engine underneath every adventure, every sci-fi concept, every absurdist comedy bit. Rick's entire life, the whole enormous, complicated machinery of his genius and his nihilism and his portal gun and his C-137 designation and his years of hunting Rick Prime and his relationship with the Citadel and all of it, is ultimately a response to the night his wife and daughter were killed. Everything else is architecture built on that wound. The intelligence was always there, but the way he uses it, the direction it runs, the purposes it serves, all of that was shaped by one evening in a garage in a dimension he eventually left and never went back to. He loved Diane. He loved Beth. He lost them both in a moment he did not choose and could not prevent, and he spent the rest of his existence building the most elaborate possible response to that loss. The portal gun is a grief response. The central finite curve is a grief response. The years of hunting Rick Prime are a grief response. The move to the dimension where a different Beth lived, the decision to insert himself into that family, the adventures with Morty, all of it is a grief response wearing the costume of adventure and genius and nihilism. And the show knows this. And the show does not present it with contempt. It presents it with a kind of aching recognition that grief does this. Grief takes the shape of whatever the grieving person reaches for. For some people, it takes the shape of becoming very busy. For some, it takes the shape of becoming very still. For some, it takes the shape of adventures across infinite dimensions, driven by the need to stay in motion so the loss can never quite catch up. The lesson is not that Rick should have grieved differently. The lesson is not even that he should have done the emotional work earlier or more fully, though the show clearly thinks he should. The lesson is simpler and more forgiving than that. The lesson is that grief is love with nowhere to go, that the scale of your grief is the measure of the scale of your love, and that the attempts a person makes to outrun grief, however extreme, however ingenious, however destructive to the people around them, are attempts to hold on to the love after the person it was meant for is gone. Rick kept Diane alive in 1,000 ways he would never directly acknowledge. He based his spaceship's AI voice on hers. He built a version of her in his home dimension that called to him from the other room. He never quite stopped being the man who loved her, which meant he could never quite become anyone else. And for all the pain that caused, for all the people he damaged in the long detour of his grief, there is something in that refusal to let her entirely go that is human and recognizable and not entirely the tragedy it sometimes looks like. What the show eventually moves toward, in its later seasons especially, is the possibility that Rick might slowly, irregularly, impermanently choose something beyond the grief, not replacing what he lost, not resolving it, just gradually allowing other things to exist alongside it. The relationship with Morty, the tentative, frequently broken, never entirely safe relationship with Beth. The moments when the performance drops and something genuine passes between him and the family he did not plan and cannot quite bring himself to fully claim. This is the most realistic portrait of recovery from loss that I have seen in popular entertainment. Not a cure, not a catharsis, not a moment where the wound is healed and everything is different after. Just the long, irregular process of finding that you are still here, and there are still people in front of you, and some of them matter to you, and that is something worth protecting. Even if you cannot say it directly, even if you say it sideways, through adventures and invention, and the specific quality of attention you pay to a 14-year-old boy who has your blood and your capability, and maybe the chance to not make all the same mistakes you made. Morty's famous speech from 60 Minutes has been quoted 10,000 times, and it will be quoted 10,000 more. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV. But the part that gets quoted less often is the part that makes the speech worth anything, which is the invitation at the end. Come watch TV. Come be present. Come be here with me in this impermanent, accidental, eventually ending moment, because this is the moment we are in and the people in it are real. That is not nihilism. Nihilism says nothing matters and therefore nothing is worth the effort. What Morty is offering Summer is different. He is saying, nothing is cosmically guaranteed to matter, and therefore the mattering you create by choosing to be here, by choosing to stay, by choosing the people in front of you over the infinite parallel versions of a life you might have had, that mattering is the realest thing there is. It is not given. It is made. And the making of it is the whole project. The show has spent 10 seasons examining all the ways people avoid this project, all the ways they use their strengths as escapes, their wounds as excuses, their intelligence as walls, their fear as a reason not to try. It has done this with enormous comedy and enormous darkness, and the kind of generosity toward human failure that only comes from people who have a genuine understanding of what failure costs. And at the end of all of it, underneath all the multiverse theory and the interdimensional adventures and the alien civilizations and the brilliant sci-fi concepts, the message is something a grandmother might have said to you over the phone. Pay attention to the people in front of you. Do the hard work of being present in your actual life. Let yourself be loved even when it is terrifying. Let go of the cage you built to keep yourself safe, because that cage is also keeping you small. Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in any universe he has ever entered. He has that in common with no one. But the things he is struggling with, the grief, the avoidance, the terror of love, the desperate need to be needed without being known, the inability to ask for what he actually wants, those things, every single one of them, he has in common with almost everyone who has ever watched his show. That is why people keep watching, not because they want to be Rick, because they recognize Rick, because they see in him the most extreme version of a thing they are also doing. And the show, in its kindness, does not tell you that you are doomed to do it forever. It just shows you the price. It shows you the garage at the end of the episode, it shows you the face down on the workbench, and it trusts you to decide what to do with what you see. Rick and Morty is a show about a genius and his grandson traveling the universe. And underneath that, it is a show about you. About the ways you hide from yourself. About the grief you carry that you have never called grief. About the love you want to give and the fear that stops you from giving it. About the cage you built around your capabilities to protect yourself from the possibility of failure. About the role you accepted without meaning to. About the version of yourself you buried in a backyard in a dimension you cannot get back to, and the question of whether the version of yourself that took its place is the one you actually wanted to be. Come watch TV. Come sit here for a moment. Because the universe is vast and cold and does not owe you an explanation, and the moments you have with the people you love, in whatever dimension you happen to find yourself in, are the most real things in it. That is the lore. That is the lesson. If this video found something in you today, if some part of this 2-hour journey through one of the strangest shows ever made left you with something to think about, please consider subscribing. It takes 2 seconds and it keeps this kind of content alive. And leave me a comment below. Tell me where you are in the world right now. Tell me what time it is where you are. Tell me which section hit closest to home, because I genuinely want to know. Thank you for spending this time here. Whatever dimension you are watching from, you belong in it. End of script. Section 11. Summer Smith and the mirror we hold up to ourselves. Summer Smith spends the first season of Rick and Morty in her bedroom. That is not an exaggeration, and it is not an accident. She is there, upstairs, on her phone, engaged with the social world of her high school in the way that teenagers are engaged with the social world of their high school, which is to say, with the intensity of someone who believes, with every cell in their body, that what is happening right now in their social circle is the most important thing that has ever happened in the history of the world. The show plays this for comedy. Summer rolls her eyes. Summer is the straight man to the show's weirdness, the teenager whose concerns are relentlessly ordinary in comparison to the universe-scale catastrophes unfolding in the garage below her bedroom floor. And then something shifts. And it shifts in a way that turns out to be about something much deeper than the comedy initially suggests. Summer starts inserting herself into the adventures. She pushes her way in. She shows up when she is not invited. She demands to be included in things that Rick has, for reasons that seem practical but carry an unmistakable emotional weight, been organizing specifically around Morty. And the reason she does this is visible. If you watch the show with some attention to what the characters are actually saying through their behavior rather than just what they say out loud. She is the one who was not chosen. Rick chose Morty as his adventure partner. This choice has a technical explanation. Morty's brainwaves complement Rick's in a specific way that helps conceal them both from detection. But the effect of this choice on Summer is real regardless of the reason. Her grandfather, the most extraordinary person she has ever encountered, the person whose approval she understands, even if she would not use that language, to be the highest available validation, chose her younger brother over her. And she has to live in the same house with that choice every day, watching them go through the garage and come back changed, and knowing she was not invited. Summer's need to be seen as cool, to be relevant, to matter socially, is the external expression of something much more personal. It is the channel through which a deeper wound expresses itself. The wound is simple and old, being passed over by someone whose opinion you care about more than you know. The expression of it is complex and contemporary. Social performance, image management, the construction of a public-facing version of yourself that is polished enough to compensate for the private version that feels uncertain and overlooked. The episode that crystallizes this is the one where Summer discovers she was almost not born. She learns that her parents, young and unprepared and not yet fully committed to each other, had considered a different choice. And this information, which any adult would hear and process with some equanimity, understanding that they are here and that is the outcome that mattered, hits Summer with the force of a confirmation. She was not planned. She was not the deliberate choice. She was, in some meaningful sense, the accident that worked out. and now she understands something about herself that she did not know she was waiting to understand. This is the show's most honest exploration of one of the most universal experiences of adolescence: the terror that you are optional, that the people who love you would be fine without you, that your presence in the world was not an intention but a consequence, and that the love that followed was not the love that is freely given because you were wanted, but the love that is given after the fact, because you are here, and what else is there to do? Morty's response to Summer's crisis in this moment is the thing that makes the Rick Minutes episode essential rather than just good. He does not try to argue her out of the pain. He does not say that her parents love her and she should be grateful and everything is fine. He does not reach for a cliché because he has been through too much for clichés to work on him anymore. He shows her the graves, he tells her the truth, and then he says the thing about nobody existing on purpose and everybody dying and come watch TV. The gift he gives her is exactly the gift she needed and could not have asked for. It is the gift of being told that the standard she is measuring herself against, the standard of having been planned and intended and chosen, is not the real standard. No one is planned in the way that would satisfy the deepest need behind that question. No one arrives in the world as the unambiguous intended product of a decision that was free and deliberate and entirely without complication. Everyone is, in some sense, an accident that worked out. And the working out is what is real, not the origin. The working out. Summer eventually becomes one of the most capable characters in the show. She handles alien encounters and galactic crises with a competence that surprises everyone who underestimated her, which is everyone, because everyone always underestimates her. She earns Rick's respect not through being given it, not through being chosen the way Morty was chosen, but through doing the thing repeatedly and well enough that the respect becomes unavoidable. There is an enormous satisfaction in watching her take up space in the show's universe that was not allocated for her. She did not get a lane. She made one. The lesson in Summer's story is about the relationship between external validation and internal worth, and about what happens when you stop waiting for the former as a prerequisite for the latter. Summer spent a long time performing confidence she did not have in order to seem like someone who deserved to be in the room. The performance was exhausting and imperfect, and nobody outside the show would have necessarily noticed it for what it was. But from the inside, she was working constantly to seem like enough, because she had not yet fully decided that she was. The shift, when it comes, is not dramatic. It does not arrive in a single moment. It comes from being in enough situations where what was required was simply the thing she was capable of, where there was no time to perform or manage image, where the alien threat was real, and the choice was between doing the thing or not doing it, and she did the thing. Capability builds confidence in a way that no amount of social performance can approximate. Not the performance of capability, actual capability, tested in real conditions, with real stakes. You do not need Rick to choose you for your version of this to happen. You do not need the person whose approval you have been running toward to finally grant it. What Summer's arc suggests is that you can choose yourself. That the moment when you stop waiting to be selected and start simply going is the moment when the question of whether you were planned or unplanned, chosen or overlooked, becomes genuinely less important than what you are doing right now. Section 12. The Smith Family as a System: How Dysfunction Moves Through Families. Rick and Morty is, among other things, a deeply precise portrait of a specific family pathology, not any single character's pathology in isolation. The family as a system, and one of the things the show does better than almost any other piece of entertainment is demonstrate how dysfunction does not just reside in individuals. It moves, it transmits. It reproduces itself across generations with a fidelity that can look almost genetic, though it is not genetic. It is behavioral, it is learned. It is the accumulated weight of how people in a family relate to each other, and to themselves being passed from parents to children the way any other learned behavior is passed, through observation and imitation, and the silent understanding of what is and is not acceptable to express. Rick is the origin point. He is not the only damaged person in the family, but he is the one from whom the damage most visibly radiates. His version of the damage is the most extreme and the most legible, because he is the character the show spends the most time examining. But the examination of Rick is most useful when it is read alongside the examination of what happened to the people downstream of him. Beth was raised partly without her father. Rick was absent for significant stretches of her childhood. The specific impact of this, the way a child fills the absence of a parent with imagination and longing, and a set of stories about why the parent left that are almost always more damaging than the truth would have been, shaped Beth in ways that she has spent her adult life trying not to acknowledge. She became, in Rick's absence, a version of herself that was organized around winning his approval when he came back. When you grow up waiting for a parent to come back and prove that they love you, you tend to build your whole identity around whatever you imagine will make that proof happen. Beth became brilliant. She became capable. She became the kind of person who could say to Rick, when he finally did return, "See, I am worth coming back to. I am your daughter. I have your qualities. I did not waste what you gave me even when you were gone." There is a version of Beth's professional ambition, her drive to be seen as intellectually serious, her discomfort with her horse surgery career that she constantly frames as beneath what she could have been, that is really just her continuing to make the case for herself to a man who has never fully explained why he left and has never fully committed to staying. Morty, 2 generations downstream from Rick's wound, has absorbed a model of the world that says adventure is the fundamental unit of value, that the most important thing happening in any moment is the adventure, that normal life is what you come back to when the real thing is over. He has been shown, through years of being Rick's companion, that the grandest possible scales of action are also the most meaningful ones. That individual feelings, individual moments, individual relationships are significant only insofar as they connect to something larger and more dramatic. This is why Morty's anxiety is both a protection and a vulnerability. The anxiety is his natural system's response to the reality that he is frequently in genuine danger. But the model that has been installed around that anxiety, the model that says danger is where meaning lives, that the most alive you will ever feel is in the middle of something terrifying, is not a healthy model for a person to live by. The show knows this. It shows you what Morty looks like when he has been through too many adventures, when the adventure model has started to replace rather than supplement ordinary life, when the ordinary has started to feel as unbearable as it feels to Rick. Jerry exists outside this system in an interesting way. He is not Rick's child. He did not grow up in the force field of Rick's particular damage. He comes from outside and he represents what it looks like to be an ordinary human being who has been inserted into an extraordinary family and who refuses, despite enormous pressure, to become extraordinary. His insecurity, his need for approval, his difficulty maintaining dignity under constant attack, these are real and they have costs. But his fundamental orientation toward ordinary human things, toward love expressed directly and daily and without glamour, toward the value of just being present in your own life without requiring it to be impressive, is something the show keeps offering as a counterpoint to the Rick model. The tragedy of the family system is that it keeps reproducing itself. Beth is passing down a version of Rick's damage to her children, softened but present. She passes down the message that worth is tied to capability, that emotions are to be managed rather than felt, that the smart response to difficult feelings is to find something more interesting to do. Morty absorbs this and adds to it the specific texture of his adventures with Rick. Summer absorbs it and adds to it the specific texture of having been the one not chosen. The show is not hopeless about this, but it is honest about it in a way that a lot of entertainment that deals with family is not. It does not suggest that one conversation, one breakthrough, one episode of genuine honesty will break the pattern. It shows Rick making small gestures toward change and then retreating. It shows Beth making progress and then collapsing back into the familiar dynamic with Rick. It shows Morty growing in some ways and being diminished in others, and neither trajectory being permanent. The pattern is durable. The work of disrupting it is slow and non-linear and frequently loses ground before it gains it. But there is always the next episode. There is always another chance to try again. The show's structure itself, the way it keeps returning to this family despite all the universe-spanning adventures, is an argument for persistence. They are still here. They are still together, more or less, through everything. And the being still here is its own kind of argument. The practical application is one that a lot of people find uncomfortable, which is why it is worth naming directly. The patterns you have are not all yours. Some of them were given to you. Some of the ways you relate to yourself and to other people were modeled for you before you had the vocabulary to recognize what was being modeled. Some of the things you do automatically, without thinking, that cause you or the people around you harm, are things you learned from watching someone you loved do them and never had reason to question because they seemed like just how things are. Recognizing this is not about blame. The people who passed these patterns to you were probably passing down patterns that were passed to them. The transmission goes back as far as the human family goes. You did not choose to receive what you received, but you are now in the position of either passing it further or noticing it clearly enough to interrupt it. Not entirely, not all at once, but in the specific moments where you catch yourself doing the thing, where you feel the pattern pulling, and you pause just long enough to ask whether this is what you actually want to do or whether this is the family system running its programming through you. The Smiths, for all their dysfunction and all the damage they perpetuate, are always given moments in which they choose something different. Small moments, impermanent ones. But the show keeps putting those moments in because it believes they matter. Because the difference between a family that perpetuates damage forever and a family that starts, slowly and imperfectly, to change it, is almost entirely located in those small moments where someone notices the pattern and, just this once, does something other than what the pattern requires. Section 13. The Ethics of Everything. What Rick and Morty says about moral responsibility. There is an episode in the second season called The Ricks Must Be Crazy that contains one of the show's most densely packed philosophical moments, disguised, as so many of the show's best ideas are, as something absurd. Rick's car battery, it turns out, contains a miniaturized universe. An entire civilization, an entire planet's worth of people, lives inside it. They have been placed there by Rick, knowingly and deliberately, and their civilization's primary purpose, the thing their entire society was organized around without knowing it, is to generate the power that runs Rick's car. When Rick and Morty visit this civilization, they find that one of its inhabitants, a scientist named Zeep, has also built a miniaturized universe inside his battery. And when Zeep and Rick discover each other's mirrors, they have to confront something that should be paralyzing for both of them. They are the gods of civilizations they created for their own convenience and have never taken responsibility for. The people in Rick's battery are real. They have lives and loves and fears and hopes, and they are also battery cells. They exist because Rick needed power. The show does not resolve this. It cannot be resolved. The episode just lets the weight of it sit there, and what it says to the audience is, all of us exist inside systems we did not choose, benefiting from things whose real costs are invisible to us, consuming resources that involve the labor and sometimes the suffering of people we will never meet. The sci-fi scale is extreme. The principle is not. Rick and Morty's ethical dimension is one of its most under-examined qualities, which is surprising given how much the show is discussed. The show is relentlessly interested in what people owe each other and what they owe the systems they are part of. Every time Rick does something that treats another being as a means to his ends, rather than as a person with their own valid existence, the show registers the cost. Not always loudly, not always in a way that Rick acknowledges or the episode makes the explicit moral of the piece, but it registers it. The Cronenberg dimension, left behind after Rick's love potion catastrophe, exists out there somewhere. The people in Rick's car battery exist out there somewhere. The Mortys who were used and discarded and traumatized by various Ricks across the Citadel's history exist out there somewhere. The show keeps those bills on the ledger even when the characters are not looking at them. And the cumulative effect of that is an ethics that is more honest than most. Most entertainment about powerful characters simply ignores the costs of that power. The powerful figure defeats the villain, and the credits roll, and the people who were casualties on the way to the victory are never seen again. Rick and Morty keeps cutting back to the casualties. It keeps showing you the versions of Morty who were already in that dimension before Rick and Morty took their places. It keeps showing you the civilizations that were disrupted or destroyed or permanently altered by Rick's passage through them. What is the lesson here? It is not, I think, that power is inherently wrong or that intelligence makes you a monster. The show loves Rick too much, understands him too well, to make that argument. The lesson is something more specific. Awareness is the beginning of responsibility. The things you benefit from without thinking about, the costs you do not pay directly, the people affected by your choices whose faces you never see, those things exist whether you are aware of them or not. And knowing they exist, even without the ability to fully account for them, is the thing that separates someone who is trying to be a moral agent from someone who has simply decided their own comfort is the relevant metric. Rick knows about the civilization in his car battery. He knows, and he goes to considerable lengths in that episode to avoid having to care about them. He knows about the dimensions he has left behind. He knows about the Mortys the Citadel has used as tools. He is not unaware. His nihilism is not ignorance. It is the performance of not caring about things he cannot bring himself to look at directly, because looking at them directly would require a response, and responses require something from him that he has decided he cannot give. The human version of this is the thing we call willful ignorance, the refusal to know what we could know because knowing it would change what we feel comfortable doing. We are all capable of this. We are all doing some version of it, about some set of facts about how our lives are constructed and who paid the cost of making them possible. The invitation the show extends, through the terrible comedy of Rick in that miniature universe confronting the man who did the same thing he did, is not to stop everything and achieve perfect ethical clarity. It is simply to be willing to look, to be willing to know, to let the knowledge exist in you and shape, however slowly and imperfectly, what you reach for next time you have a choice. Section 14. Grief, Revenge, and the Trap of the Vendetta. One of the most important revelations about Rick's backstory is also one of the most clarifying moments the show has ever had about the psychology of revenge. When it is finally revealed that Rick spent decades hunting Rick Prime, the man responsible for the deaths of Diane and young Beth, the show gives us the full portrait of what that mission cost him and what it did not give him in return. Rick Prime killed Diane and Beth as an act of spite, as a demonstration, as the most extreme possible response to the refusal of Rick C-137 to abandon his family and join the other Rick in his adventures. The killing was not about Diane or Beth. It was about Rick Prime's contempt for attachment, his belief that caring about other people was a weakness, and his decision to punish Rick C-137 for having that weakness. He killed them to prove a point about the stupidity of love. Rick C-137's response was everything his intelligence and capability could produce. He built a portal gun, he started hunting, he killed his way through the multiverse, dimension by dimension, Rick by Rick, until he had annihilated every other version of himself he encountered in the long process of trying to find the one he was actually looking for. He built the Citadel partly as an organized version of this hunt. He kept a Diane AI in the dimension he used to call home, an electronic ghost who would call to him from the other room and remind him of what he had lost and what he needed to do about it. He found Rick Prime eventually, and he killed him. He finally, after decades, got what he had spent his entire existence organizing toward. And the show is extraordinarily careful about what it shows you in that moment. Because what it shows you is not satisfaction. It is not closure. It is not the thing that the long quest implied was waiting at the end. It is just the end of a long, consuming, life-organizing thing. And after the end of that thing, there is an absence. Not the absence of the wound. The wound is still there. Diane is still gone. Young Beth is still gone. The night in the garage is still the night in the garage. The killing of Rick Prime does not restore anything because the thing that was taken cannot be restored by an equivalent taking. This is the show's most direct engagement with what revenge actually does and does not do. The mythology around revenge is powerful and old. The idea that settling the account, that making the person responsible for your pain pay the equivalent price, will in some way restore the balance, will give you something back, will quiet the wound. This mythology is compelling because it has a logic to it. The equation makes sense on paper. They took something from you. You take something from them. The ledger balances. The ledger does not balance. The ledger has never balanced for anyone who has ever tried to balance it this way, because what was taken from you was not a neutral resource that can be replaced by an equivalent resource. It was a specific person, a specific relationship, a specific version of your life that existed before the loss and stopped existing after it. And no amount of harm done to the person responsible for that loss recreates what was there before. It just adds to the total amount of harm in the universe while leaving the wound exactly as it was. Rick kills Rick Prime. The music that plays over it is not triumphant. The scene that follows is not the scene where Rick finally begins to heal. It is the scene where Rick has to face, for the first time without the organizing purpose of the vendetta, what is left. And what is left is grief. Just grief. without the structure that the revenge quest gave to it for all those years, without the mission to organize around, without Rick Prime as the obstacle between Rick and the thing Rick could not have. What the show suggests, through this arc, is something that grief counselors and therapists and philosophers across cultures have been saying for a very long time. The task of grief is not to assign blame and exact a cost. The task of grief is to find a way to continue living in a world from which something essential has been removed. Those two things can coexist, the justified anger and the necessity of continuing to live, but they pull in different directions. The anger says, stay here, stay focused on what was done to you, hold the wound open and accountable. The grief says you have to go forward eventually. You have to find out what kind of person you are going to be in the life that remains after the loss. Rick spent decades choosing the anger over the grief, and the anger was understandable. The anger was, in a human sense, correct. What Rick Prime did was monstrous. The rage Rick felt was proportionate. But the rage, chosen over and over across decades, used as the engine of an entire life, became a cage as surely as the central finite curve. Because you cannot organize your life around someone else's destruction without organizing your life around that person. Rick Prime was the center of Rick's universe for decades, not despite the hatred but because of it. Hatred is a form of attachment. The vendetta kept Rick Prime present in Rick's life, always, as the thing that needed to be destroyed before anything else could begin. And when it is finally done, when Rick Prime is finally dead, the freedom that arrives is not the freedom Rick imagined it would be. It is the freedom of having nothing left to organize around. And that freedom is terrifying, because what it requires is exactly the thing Rick has been using the vendetta to avoid, showing up to his own life and deciding what it is about. The lesson here is one that applies to any version of the vendetta, from the dramatic to the mundane. Holding someone accountable in the landscape of your own mind, making them the organizing principle of your life, building your identity around what was done to you and what needs to happen in response, is a way of staying in relationship with the person who hurt you. It is a way of letting them continue to shape your choices long after the original harm was done. The harm is real. The anger is real. The grief is real. But the choice of whether to organize your life around it is yours. And sometimes the most powerful act is not revenge, but the decision to stop giving the person who hurt you the power to determine the direction of your days. Section 15. The finale and the ongoing what comes after knowing all of this. Rick and Morty is still going. As of the time of this video, the show is in its 8th season, having moved past the departure of its original voice actors and continued with a creative team that remains committed to the same deep, uncomfortable, generously comic examination of what it is to be a person in a universe that does not explain itself. The later seasons have continued the show's essential project. They have gone deeper into Rick's capacity for actual change, impermanent and partial as that change always is. They have explored what it looks like for him to slowly, very slowly, begin to let the Diane wound have something other than total dominance over his choices. Season 8 in particular brought this to a kind of resolution that feels both earned and true to the show's refusal of easy comfort. Rick erases his remaining memories of Diane, not because he has stopped loving her, but because he has finally accepted that carrying those memories has been the mechanism of staying stuck. He lets her go, in the most Rick possible way, which is with enormous technical ingenuity applied to a problem that is ultimately just about the willingness to move on. The show does not present this as a cure. It presents it as a step, one impermanent, potentially reversible step in the direction of a man who might, eventually, find out what kind of person he is without the grief and the vendetta and the central finite curve to hide inside. The show trusts you to understand that steps like these are not endpoints. They are just steps, and taking them, even knowing they might be reversed, is still meaningful. This is, I think, the most mature thing Rick and Morty does. It does not promise transformation. It does not offer the narrative arc that ends with the character fully healed, fundamentally changed, the wound addressed, and the person renewed. What it offers instead is the ongoing, the irregular, non-linear, frequently reversing, sometimes advancing process of being a person who is damaged and who keeps showing up anyway, who keeps coming back to the family, who keeps going on the adventures, who keeps being, however imperfectly, present in the life they have rather than the one they lost. There is a kind of hope in that portrayal that is harder to feel than the conventional narrative hope of the transformation story, but also more durable, because it matches what change actually looks like from the inside. You do not wake up one morning a different person. You make a choice, and then you make another one, and then you go back on the choice, and then you make it again, and gradually over time something shifts. Not everything, not forever, but something, and for now, for everyone watching this right now, whether you came to this video for entertainment or for something more, whether Rick and Morty is something you love for the comedy or something you return to because it says things about your own life that nothing else quite manages to say, I hope something in this 2 hours has been useful. Not necessarily the specific ideas I've spent all this time working through. Sometimes the useful thing is just being in the company of a show or a video or anything that takes human struggle seriously enough to look at it clearly. The universe is vast. It is genuinely, incomprehensibly, unfathomably vast. Your life inside it is small by any measure you choose to apply. And it is also the only one you have, and it is happening right now, and the people in it are real, and they will not be there forever. The small, ordinary, unglamorous, frequently embarrassing work of being present in that life, of doing the emotional maintenance that keeps relationships alive and the self honest, is not lesser than the adventures. It is the thing the adventures are in service of, even if they sometimes forget that. Rick has been running for a very long time, and he keeps coming back. And maybe, eventually, he will decide that coming back is not just what he does when he runs out of somewhere to go. Maybe he will decide that it is where he was always supposed to be. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. But you are here right now. And that is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Thank you for being here. If this found something in you, subscribe, leave a comment, tell me where you are in the world and what this hit on for you. I read everything. I will be back with more. End of script. Full draft. Extended meditation. The microverse battery and what we owe the people we never see. Let us go back to that car battery for a moment, because it deserves more room than we gave it. The microverse battery episode, formerly titled The Ricks Must Be Crazy, is structured as a comedy of recursive scale. Rick and Morty enter the battery to fix it, discover an entire civilization inside, and spend the episode navigating increasingly absurd complications involving the scientist Zeep, who has independently discovered the same technology Rick used to create the whole setup. The comedy of the episode is excellent. The science fiction premise is executed with genuine creativity, but the thing that sits in the background of every frame, unaddressed but impossible to ignore, is this. Rick created sentient beings who do not know they are batteries. They live. They have families. They have scientists and politicians and wars and art and all the things that sentient life generates when it has enough time. And every bit of that civilization's energy, the metabolic output of every body in it, goes to powering Rick's car. They did not consent to this. They do not know about it. The meaning they have constructed for their lives has nothing to do with the purpose for which their lives exist. Zeep, the scientist inside the battery who has become the most brilliant person in his civilization, has figured out that something is wrong. He has built his own micro-universe for power, without understanding that he is replicating the exact structure he is living inside of. When he and Rick finally understand the mirror they are looking into, when Zeep realizes that the civilization he is living inside was engineered for someone else's convenience, the scene is one of the most quietly devastating in the whole series. Because what do you do with that? What do you do when you discover that the universe you live in, the one you gave your whole life to understanding, was built not for you but for a being you had no knowledge of? As a component in a machine you cannot see? Zeep's rage is proportionate. His demand that Rick take responsibility is proportionate. And Rick's response, which is to be largely unmoved by all of this because the scale of the inconvenience is not worth his attention, is one of the show's clearest illustrations of how power insulates itself from consequence. Rick does not feel what he owes Zeep's civilization, because he does not have to feel it. The costs are paid by people who are too small in his frame of reference to register as people at all. This scales down to real life in uncomfortable ways. The shirt you are wearing was made somewhere by someone. The phone in your pocket was assembled by people in factories whose working conditions most of us would find genuinely troubling if we spent time thinking about them. The food on your table traveled through supply chains that involve labor conditions that are, in many cases, exactly as invisible and exactly as exploitative as the civilization in Rick's car battery. We do not see these people. We are not designed to see them. The system we live in is, in this specific way, a central finite curve. It organizes what is visible to us so that we do not have to reckon with what our comfort costs. This is not a political argument in the partisan sense. It is an observation about the structure of awareness and the relationship between power and visibility. The people who pay the highest costs for the systems that benefit the most people are almost always the people who are least visible within those systems. Rick's car works because the battery civilization keeps its lights on. Most of us do not ask what is in the battery. What Rick and Morty asks, through this episode and through countless other moments, is not that you destroy the car. It is not even that you stop using the battery. It is something more modest and more demanding than either of those things. That you be willing to know what is in it. That you resist the comfort of not knowing. That you hold the knowledge of cost in your awareness even when acting on it is complicated or impractical or feels beyond your individual capacity. Because the alternative, the choice to not know, is not neutral. Every time you actively choose not to think about a thing because thinking about it is uncomfortable, you are making a choice that allows the thing to continue. Willful ignorance is a form of participation, and you cannot be a moral agent in a world whose machinery you refuse to examine. Rick knows about the battery. He chooses not to care, not because he lacks the capacity for care, but because caring would require something from him that he does not want to give. That choice, repeated across the show in 100 different contexts, is the show's most sustained critique of Rick, not his nihilism, which is at least philosophically coherent. Not his intelligence, which is extraordinary and mostly used for good even when it serves him, but his chosen blindness. His refusal to let the costs of his existence in the world register on the same scale as the benefits. The question the episode leaves with you is the same question it leaves with Zeep. Now that you know, what are you going to do with the knowledge? Extended meditation, Bird Person, and what it means to stay. We talked briefly about Bird Person in the context of Rick's relationships, but the character deserves a longer look because of what he represents in the show's moral universe. In a show full of characters who leave, who abandon, who run, who disappear through portal guns into other dimensions and other problems, Bird Person stays. That is his defining quality, as we noted. But the staying is worth examining more closely, because it is not passive. It is not the staying of someone who cannot leave. It is the staying of someone who chooses, every day, to remain. Rick and Bird Person's friendship was forged in combat, in the rebellion against the Galactic Federation. They fought together. They survived things together. Those experiences built a bond of the specific kind that only comes from being genuinely afraid alongside someone, from depending on someone in conditions where depending on them was a matter of life and survival. That kind of bond is different from bonds built in ordinary conditions. It is tested in a way that most bonds are not, and it held. What makes Bird Person interesting as a character is that he represents the alternative path. He and Rick started from similar places. Both were rebels. Both had fought against authority. Both had seen things that could have broken them toward nihilism. Rick went in that direction. Bird Person did not. He came out of the same experiences with his principles intact, with his capacity for loyalty undiminished, with something that looks like genuine equanimity rather than the performance of it. The show does not tell us how he managed this. It does not give us the therapy arc or the philosophical conversation where Bird Person explains what he did differently. His way of being is just there, quiet and complete, a presence in Rick's life that functions as a kind of ongoing challenge, simply by existing. Because every time Bird Person is on screen, he is a demonstration that a person can go through what Rick went through and come out the other side as someone who still believes in things. Who still has people they are loyal to? Who still moves toward connection rather than away from it? What the show does with Bird Person's relationship with Tammy is among the cruelest things it does to any character. Tammy was an agent of the Galactic Federation, placed undercover in Bird Person's life specifically to gather intelligence and ultimately to eliminate him. Their relationship, which appeared genuine and which Bird Person clearly experienced as genuine, was a construction, a lie. built on the specific quality that made him most vulnerable, which was his total commitment when he chose to give it. He gave himself to Tammy completely. He opened himself without reservation. He did the thing that a person defined by loyalty would do. He trusted, and she used that against him. The wedding is one of the most emotionally violent things the show has done, not because of the physical violence, though there is plenty of that, because of the specific target of the betrayal. Tammy did not just attack Birdperson as a combatant. She attacked him through the quality he is most defined by. His loyalty, the thing the show has consistently presented as his most admirable characteristic, became the mechanism of his destruction. He trusted completely, and complete trust, weaponized by someone operating in bad faith, is an undefendable position. The transformation of Birdperson into Phoenix Person, the Galactic Federation's reconstruction of him as a cyborg soldier without memory of who he was, is the show's image for what happens when the capacity for loyalty is destroyed. Not the person. The person's body survives and is rebuilt and is, in some technical sense, walking around. But the thing that made the person worth knowing, the specific quality that made their presence in Rick's life meaningful, is gone. What remains is a weapon wearing the face of a friend. Rick's grief over Birdperson is one of the most legitimate emotional responses Rick ever has, and one of the ones he is least able to express directly. He does not cry over Birdperson. He does not make speeches. He does not have the conventional grief responses that we recognize. What he does is fight. He goes to war to try to get Birdperson back, not just as an act of revenge against the Federation, but as an act of love for the specific person he lost. Because Birdperson was the living proof that Rick was capable of being loved without conditions, of having a friendship that did not require anything from him except showing up. And Rick cannot find that anywhere else. The lesson in Birdperson's story is about the specific courage of staying. It is easy to romanticize loyalty as a trait, to speak about it in abstract terms as a virtue. It is much harder to examine what it actually costs the people who practice it. Birdperson's loyalty cost him everything. His total commitment to the people and causes he cared about left him without the guarded distance that might have protected him from Tammy's betrayal. His refusal to hedge, to hold back, to be strategic about his openness, made him the most vulnerable version of himself in every significant relationship he had. And the show does not present this as a reason not to be loyal. It presents it as the cost of the thing, which is different. Loyalty and openness and full commitment to the people you love carry real risk. People can betray them. People can use them against you. Being open is not safe. Staying is not safe. The universe the show depicts is not one in which good qualities protect you from bad outcomes. Good qualities cost, and the willingness to pay that cost, knowing the risk, choosing the openness anyway, is what makes Birdperson's character not just admirable, but genuinely courageous. The question the show poses through Birdperson's arc is one worth sitting with. Do you let the risk of betrayal make you less loyal, less open, less willing to give yourself fully to the people and things you care about? Or do you understand that the risk is inherent to the quality, and that removing the risk removes the thing itself? You cannot be truly loyal without making yourself vulnerable to the cost of that loyalty. You cannot love without accepting the possibility of loss. The wall you put up to protect yourself from those costs is also the wall that makes connection impossible. Birdperson built no wall. He was, in the most literal possible sense, defenseless. And the show mourns what that cost him, and it never suggests he should have done otherwise. Extended meditation, the 3-minute speech that changed everything. There is a moment near the end of the Season 1 episode 60 Minutes where Morty takes Summer outside in the dark and shows her the graves in the backyard and says what he says. We have discussed it at length, but there is something about the specific quality of that moment, the way it is written and played and timed and structured, that deserves its own extended look. Because it is, I would argue, the moment the show became something more than an excellent science fiction comedy. It is the moment it became a show about something. Morty has just watched his family fall apart over alternate reality television. He has watched his parents discover what their lives might have looked like, and use that knowledge as a weapon against each other. He has watched his sister learn that she was almost not born, and respond to that knowledge by packing her bags. And now he is standing outside in the night air, and he has a choice. He can offer comfort of the conventional kind. He can lie. He can smooth it over. He can do the thing that anxious, conflict-averse, not very impressive at school Morty always does, which is to fold. He does not fold. He shows her the graves. Think about what that decision requires. Morty has been carrying the knowledge of those graves since the moment they were dug. He has been living in this house, sleeping in this bed, having these meals, having these normal moments of family life, knowing that a few feet of dirt away in the backyard are two bodies that are his and Rick's from the dimension where things went wrong and they died. He has not told anyone. He has just carried it, the way Rick taught him to carry things, by not stopping, by keeping moving, by putting one foot in front of the other and pretending the weight is not there. But in this moment, with his sister about to walk out because she has been given information that makes her feel like she does not belong, Morty decides that the weight is worth sharing. Not to make her feel better exactly, not to fix the pain, to give her something real, to give her the thing that he has, which is the truth of how impermanent and accidental and undesigned all of this is. Here is where I am actually standing, he is saying. Here is the ground under my feet. Come stand on it with me. The speech that follows is not comforting in the conventional sense. It does not say everything will be okay. It does not say your pain is not real or your fear is not valid. It says all of this, all of us, is accidental and temporary and unintended. And then it invites her to come sit with him inside that fact, not to escape it or overcome it, but to just be with it together. Come watch TV. Come be here. In the impermanence and the accident and the nobody knowing what is going on, come be here with me. The show never tops this moment. There are moments as good. There are moments that hit differently. But the raw emotional truth of this exchange, the particular courage of a 14-year-old traumatized boy deciding to be honest with his sister because she needs the truth more than she needs comfort, this is the show at its most itself. What Morty offers in that speech is not nihilism, as we have established. It is something closer to what certain Buddhist and Stoic traditions describe when they talk about acceptance. Not acceptance as resignation, not acceptance as giving up, acceptance as the clear-eyed acknowledgement of what is real, without the additional suffering that comes from wanting it to be different. The universe does not owe you a plan. The universe does not owe you a purpose. The universe is large and cold and did not design itself around your arrival. And sitting with that, really sitting with it, really letting it in, does not have to leave you with nothing. It can leave you with something very specific, the present moment, the actual people in it, the actual choice you have right now about how to spend the time you have. Summer stays. She does not run. She goes back inside and the family, fractured and painful and completely unreformed, is still there together. That is the episode's answer. Not healing, not resolution. Just the choice to stay, made freely, with full knowledge of how impermanent and accidental it all is. That might be the most important choice in the whole show. Extended meditation. What the adventures are actually about. Rick and Morty is, on the surface, an adventure show. The premise is adventures. You press play and there is usually an adventure unfolding within the first 2 minutes. Aliens, dimensions, inventions, crises, narrow escapes, impossible situations resolved through impossible means. The adventure is the vehicle the show uses to deliver everything else, and it is a remarkably good vehicle. The adventures are genuinely imaginative, genuinely surprising, genuinely fun in the way that the best science fiction is fun, which is the way that makes you feel like the universe is bigger and stranger than you had remembered. But the show has a complex relationship with its own adventures. It keeps undercutting them. It keeps following the adventure with a moment that recontextualizes everything that just happened. It keeps asking, in 100 different ways, what the adventure was actually for. Not in the narrative sense, in the psychological sense. Why is Rick choosing this? What need is the adventure serving? What is he getting out of moving at this speed, through these experiences, toward whatever comes next? The question of what adventures are actually for is worth sitting with for a while, because it connects to something that is not specific to Rick or to the show at all. There is a mode of living that some people fall into, often people who are capable and energetic and have resources, that looks like a life fully lived but is actually a very sophisticated form of avoidance. The constant project, the constant trip, the constant new city or new job or new relationship or new challenge. The life that is always moving toward the next thing because stopping Really stopping, standing still in your actual life and being present in it without the forward momentum feels genuinely intolerable. Rick lives this mode at cosmological scale. His version of it is infinite. The multiverse gives him infinite potential next things to move toward. But the show keeps showing us that the movement does not result in arrival. Every adventure ends and the family is back at the table for dinner, and Rick is reaching for another drink. Every dimension crossed and the situation is essentially unchanged. He is still the man with the wound. He is still the man who lost Diane. He is still the man who cannot quite let anyone close enough to matter in the way that Diane mattered. The adventures, for Rick, are what the work projects are for the workaholic, what the gym is for the person who is disciplining themselves instead of feeling themselves, what the drinks are for the person at the end of the day who just needs to not think. They are the motion that substitutes for arrival. They are the doing that makes it possible to not be. They are not meaningless. They are genuinely wonderful things, and the show celebrates them genuinely even while questioning them. But they are not what they look like from the outside. From the outside, they look like a life. From the inside, they are a way of not having to live one. The contrast with Morty's relationship to the adventures is instructive. Morty does not choose the adventures, he is brought along. And because he is brought along rather than choosing, he experiences them differently. He experiences the consequences. He carries the weight of them. He has nightmares. He buries his dead body in the backyard, and he cannot just move on the way Rick can, because he does not have the emotional infrastructure of a person who has been using adventure as avoidance for decades. He still feels everything. And because he still feels everything, the adventures land on him differently. They are not escape for him. They are experiences, in the fullest and most costly sense of the word. This is why Morty is, in a specific, important way, living more fully than Rick. Not more impressively, not more powerfully, but more fully. He is inside his experiences in a way that Rick, who moves through them and past them and on to the next one, is not. Morty carries his adventures with him. They become part of him in a way they do not become part of Rick. And while this has costs, while Morty is clearly being damaged by some of what he carries, it is also the thing that makes him real in a way that Rick is not quite real. Rick is a force. Morty is a person. And the difference is the difference between someone who passes through their own life and someone who actually inhabits it. The invitation here, the transfer to real life, is to examine your own adventures. Not the literal kind, necessarily. The things you reach for when you do not want to be where you are. The projects, the screens, the plans, the constant reorganization of what you are going to do next. To ask whether they are genuine engagement with your life or whether they are the psychologically sophisticated equivalent of turning yourself into a pickle. To ask whether the motion is in service of something or whether the motion is the thing that keeps you from having to stop. Stopping is hard. Being still in your actual life, with the actual people in it, with the actual weight of the things you are carrying, is genuinely hard. Rick has the resources to make it almost impossible for himself to have to do it. Most of us do not have infinite dimensions to escape into, but we have enough options that stopping is a choice rather than a necessity. And the show's consistent, gentle, sometimes brutal argument is that the choice to stop, to be present, to let the life you are in actually register on you, is the most important choice available. Not the most impressive, not the most productive, the most important. Extended meditation, the show's relationship to meaning itself. Let us end with the philosophical question the show has been circling since its first episode, which is the question of meaning, not in the abstract sense, in the practical sense. The question of what makes a life worth living when you have access, through the show's science fiction premises, to direct evidence that the universe is vast, indifferent, and not organized around human significance in any way. Rick's access to the multiverse is, among other things, a meaning machine running in reverse. Every time he opens a portal, he is confronted with evidence that everything that happens in any one dimension is also happening differently in infinite other dimensions simultaneously. The choice he made in this dimension was made differently in that one. The thing he is proud of here was not done there. The person he loves in this version is not the same in the next version. The meaning he has attached to specific events, specific people, specific outcomes, is revealed by the sheer existence of infinite alternate versions to be contingent, Not inherent, not given, not cosmic. Just the specific significance that specific events have in specific versions of a story that is being told in infinite versions simultaneously. This should be paralyzing. For Rick, it frequently is, or would be if he allowed himself to sit with it long enough. His nihilism is a rational response to the evidence. If everything is happening in infinite versions, then nothing that happens in this version can have inherent weight. The death is also a non-death. The love is also an absence of love. The choice is also the unchosen thing. The meaning is, in the cold light of the multiverse, a preference, not a fact. And yet, the show does not land on this conclusion and stay there. Because the show is interested in the question of whether that logical argument, even if it is correct, is actually the right frame for a human life. Whether the fact that your life is one of infinite variations makes it meaningless, or whether it makes it the specific, particular, unrepeatable version that you are actually in, which is the only one that exists for you, the only one you will ever experience, the only one in which the people you love are the people they are to you. Morty's answer in 60 Minutes is the show's answer. The logical argument about infinite dimensions and the cosmic irrelevance of any individual life is true, as far as it goes. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. These are not poetic exaggerations. They are accurate descriptions of reality. And they point, with the kind of inexorable logic that Rick's intelligence has already run through 1,000 times, toward the conclusion that nothing matters. But then Morty adds the invitation. Come watch TV. Come be here. Inside the accurate description of how small and impermanent and unintended all of this is, there is still the option to come sit on this couch with me and watch something together. And that option does not become meaningless just because the universe is infinite. The universe being infinite makes the specific this, the specific here, the specific now, not less meaningful but differently meaningful. It is the only version of this moment you will ever have. The infinite other versions of it do not compete with it. They are not available to you. This one is. The show's argument about meaning is, in the end, not nihilistic and not conventionally optimistic. It is something more precise. Meaning is not discovered, it is chosen. It is not inherent in events or things or people. It is applied to them, deliberately, by the people who are present in those events and things and with those people. You choose what you invest with significance, not arbitrarily, not randomly. The things that matter to you are not random, but they are yours. The meaning is yours, and you make it by showing up, by paying attention, by choosing to be present in the specific, accidental, impermanent, utterly particular version of existence that is yours. Rick, for all his nihilism, makes this choice too. He makes it every time he comes back. Every time the adventure ends, and he is at the dinner table. Every time he does something that protects Morty, that keeps the family intact, that demonstrates, through action rather than words, that these specific people in this specific dimension matter to him in a way that his entire philosophical framework says they should not. He is always choosing against his own philosophy. He is always choosing the small, particular, impermanent thing over the infinite, indifferent cosmos. He is always choosing to come back. That is not nihilism. That is its opposite, practiced badly and inconsistently and with enormous damage along the way, but practiced. He keeps coming back. That is the choice. And the choice is what makes the show, in the end, something other than a very funny argument for despair. It is an argument for the stubborn, impractical, cosmically unjustified choice to keep showing up for the people and moments that matter to you. Not because the universe rewards that choice, not because it is logical, not because anything about the scale of existence makes it the rational option, just because they are here, and you are here, and the moment is this one, and you are choosing it. Nobody exists on purpose. But you are here, and you can choose to be here on purpose, starting now.